Chapter 339. I will represent the 36th peak. However, his words were like a clap of thunder in the girl's ears. She almost dropped the basin full of blood in her hands. It's you. You may leave. The short old man did not say anything else. Yes, Elder. The girl was stunned. Her eyes were blank, as if she had not recovered from the shock. She left the room. In the room, the short old man looked at the injuries on Su Yi's body. For some reason, he was surprised. However, he immediately covered the wounds with gauze gently. His expression returned to normal. He took out a pill and opened Su Yi's tightly shut teeth. Then, he gently helped Su Yi to sit down cross-legged. Boy, you seem to be a little extraordinary. I don't care where you come from. Since I've saved you, I'll save you to the end. But if you break the law and commit crimes, I, Su Kwanga, will kill you with my own hands. The short old man said calmly as if he was talking to himself. He sat cross-legged behind Su Yi. He formed a seal with his hands, and a light spread out from his palms. Finally, he placed his palms on Su Yi's back. A gentle green yuan qi flowed out and slowly poured into Su Yi's body. Expert, this is a super expert. This time, Su Yi's consciousness could clearly sense that the old man was a super expert. He did not see the old man. Just by listening to his voice, he could feel that he was a super expert. As the old man stepped into the room, the air in the room became different. The entire space also changed imperceptibly. He saved me. 36th peak, Elder Sruga. That's right, Sui thought. It seemed that the old man had saved him and brought him here. A gentle wood elemental yuan qi flowed into Su Yi's body. It carried an inexplicable vitality and was as gentle as a spring breeze. It flowed in Su Yi's body and wrapped around Su Yi's internal organs, bones, muscles, and all the injuries on his body. This wave of yuan qi healed Su Yi's injuries, causing Su Yi's body, which was already in intense pain, to suddenly feel an indescribable sense of comfort. This wave of essence qi spread throughout his body, spreading out the medicinal effects of the pill Su Yi had just consumed and the ointment on his body, allowing the medicinal effects to spread throughout his body. Su Yi felt comfortable all over as the effects of the ointment he had just applied and the pill he had taken spread throughout his body. Su Yi wanted to open his mouth to express his gratitude. This expert was healing him. Su Yi felt grateful, but he couldn't say anything. Weird, extraordinary. 2 hours later, the short old man stopped treating Su Yi's injuries. He looked at Su Yi with surprise in his eyes, and his eyebrows twitched. After a while, the old man got up and placed Su Yi on the bed. He glanced at him and then left. Su Yi was the only one left in the room. It was completely silent. Heal. I have to heal as soon as possible. He wasn't dead yet, and he didn't know where he was. However, Su Yi knew that he had to recover as soon as possible. He had to heal as soon as possible. Although the expert had healed him earlier, and he had even taken the pill and applied the ointment, he still couldn't circulate his yuan qi at this moment. Su Yi could feel that his body of Vajra was recovering on its own. It was just that the speed of recovery was very slow. Fortunately, the ointment and elixir were extraordinary. In addition to the treatment from the expert just now, his injuries were continuously recovering. However, Su Yi knew that he had to be able to circulate his yuan qi to heal himself. He tried to circulate his yuan qi, but his injuries were too serious. After several attempts, Su Yi finally managed to circulate a wisp of yuan qi from his exhausted dantian after several hours. Continue. Su Yi continued, not daring to stop. He had to recover as soon as possible. It seemed that he was still alive, but he didn't know how Su Tianke was doing. Su Yi also thought of the 9 Lives Demon Cat. He didn't know how the 9 Lives Demon Cat was doing. In the last scene, it seemed to have self-destructed. Could the 9 Lives Demon Cat have died? Time passed slowly. After several hours, Su Yi's body was shrouded in a layer of faint crimson light. As time passed, the crimson light on Su Yi's body became more and more intense. At this moment, no one could see that there was a mysterious force surging from inside Su Yi's body. The bone-deep wound was healing. Although the speed was slow, it was already very terrifying. The ointment on Su Yi's body began to dry up. The next day, Su Yi's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. His pale face was still ashen, but there was a faint light in his eyes. In just a moment, Su Yi sat cross-legged, formed a hand seal, and closed his eyes again. He circulated the Origin Supreme technique to refine the medicinal power in his body and let it flow through his body. This medicinal pill was extraordinary and definitely expensive. Su Yi had never seen a medicinal pill of such a high grade. At this moment, Su Yi's body of the Guardian Warrior also played a huge role in healing his severely injured body. This feeling made Su Yi feel as if his cells were being reborn. He could clearly feel that his body was recovering. As Su Yi circulated the Origin Supreme technique to heal his injuries, the medicinal power in his body and the ointment spread throughout his body, turning into a rich energy. Time continued to pass like this. Su Yi's body gradually began to emit the sound of waves of air. The crimson light spread out like a burning flame, emitting a majestic aura. Walala, the light on Su Yi's body was still growing brighter and brighter. The trembling sound in his body was gradually replaced by a series of roars, like wind and thunder. A layer of crimson light flowed, covering Su Yi's body. It was like a mysterious power was flowing, like a rain of light erupting, making the entire room brilliant. This light overflowed, and Su Yi's body that was riddled with wounds healed at a speed that was difficult to detect with the naked eye. The wounds on his body were fading. As time passed, everything continued. The light around Su Yi's body became more and more dazzling, emitting a series of clanging sounds. There was a mysterious power constantly overflowing around his body. Su Yi sat cross-legged, his body glowing. After the ointment dried and the scars formed, it gradually fell off. The pores all over his body seemed to be opening, absorbing the mysterious energy and fusing it into his body, emitting a divine light. All of this was very mysterious. If someone saw this at this moment, they would definitely be shocked. Healing injuries could actually cause such a commotion. For a full 3 days, the girl did not return to the room. It was just enough time for Su Yi to completely focus on healing his injuries. In just 3 days, the scars on Su Yi's body had not only healed, but they were also slowly disappearing. However, there were still many scars. Early in the morning, a ray of sunlight shone through the window. Creak! The door was pushed open, and a 14 or 15-year-old boy pushed the door open and entered. However, when he saw the figure on the bed, shrouded in crimson light, a terrifying aura swept out. Ding, ding. Under the frightening aura, the girl's figure staggered back, and she only stabilized her body after a few steps. Square root, CTC Authentic, plus Chapter HX1F. Chapter 340. A terrifying aura swept out, causing the girl's heart to tremble for no reason. It was as if even her soul was trembling. Looking up at the room, the girl's eyes were filled with shock. The red light on the bed was dazzling, and this terrifying aura was like a pressure that could not be provoked. The aura was majestic and destructive. At this moment, from the figure wrapped in red light on the bed, there was a faint sound of wind and thunder, causing one's heart to beat faster. Voila! Following the girl's shock, the red light on the bed immediately fluctuated, as if it had drilled into the pores of the figure sitting cross-legged and disappeared. Although there were still faint scars on that figure's body, they were already very faint. They were just scars, and his face was no longer pale. Instead, there were a few strands of red on his cheeks. At the same time as a turbid breath was spat out from his throat, Su Yi also opened his eyes. There was a red light flashing in his eyes, and then it was restrained. The girl stood in front of the door and looked at the young man on the bed. Her eyes fiercely twitched a few times. Was this really the young man who was on the verge of death? At this moment, the appearance of the young man in front of her didn't look like the one who was on the verge of death 3 days ago. "You're awake?" The girl came back to her senses and walked into the room. That angular face, that deep and tenacious gaze, seemed to be unforgettable. The girl couldn't help but take a few more glances. Suddenly, as if she had thought of something, her face suddenly flushed red. She screamed and immediately turned around. In her hand, she threw a stack of clothes to the bed and said, "Why aren't you wearing clothes? It's so embarrassing." He felt that someone had broken in and immediately stopped healing. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a scream. Only then did remember that he wasn't wearing anything. Listening to the voice, it seemed to be the girl who had wiped his wounds and applied the ointment. "I'm not wearing anything." "Didn't you take it off?" He muttered, but only in his heart. He picked up the clothes the girl threw and immediately put them on. The clothes were new and very clean. He wore a gray gown and a pair of cotton boots. Both of them were embroidered with a special pattern, which looked like a badge. They fit him very well. "I asked Zhang Qing to pick it up from the outer sect disciples. I don't know if it fits you." The young girl turned around. Her cheeks were crimson red, all the way to her earlobes. She had come this time with the intention of applying medicine to the young man's wounds. Knowing that the young man's clothes could no longer be worn, he sent someone to the outer sect to collect a new set of clothes. Who knew that when he arrived, he would see such a scene? "Thank you, Mississippi." He hurriedly put on his clothes, tidied up his attire, and got off the bed. "Are you done? Looks like you don't need any more ointment for your wounds." Only then did the young girl slowly turn around. Her face was delicate and pretty, and her large black eyes were as clear as a pool of clear water. Suyi's gaze moved slightly as he looked at the young girl. This young girl was probably about the same age as Wan'er. Her face was sparkling and translucent, and her skin was as smooth as snow. Her delicate and pretty face even had a small dimple on it. At this moment, her face was flushed, and she looked shy. "Thank you, miss, for saving me." Sui expressed his thanks. Although this young girl was not very old, her figure was already quite exquisite. Moreover, there was a fluctuation of aura leaking out from her body. Sui estimated that her cultivation was at the 7th or 8th level of the soul essence stage. At the age of 14 or 15, she was already at the 7th or 8th level of the essence soul realm. This was already an extraordinary talent. Sui still remembered that when Ji Chao from the Sacred Mountain came to Man City, he was only at the 1st level of the Yuan Profound Realm. However, Ji Chao was slightly older than him. "I didn't save you. It was Elder Sui who saved you." Elder Sui said that it was a miracle that you survived. The young girl shook her head, and the blush on her face gradually faded a little. She looked at Sui curiously, sizing him up. It had only been 3 days, and this young man had actually recovered to the point where he was fine. Moreover, when she opened the door and entered, she had sensed a terrifying aura. Everything proved that this young man was not simple and was very special. "Where's this place? Who is Elder Sui?" Sui asked. After regaining consciousness, he heard someone treating his injuries. It was a super expert with an unfathomable aura. He could vaguely hear the name Saruga. "This is the Xinjiang Gate. Elder Sui is not an ordinary person in the Xinjiang Gate. Even the sect master has to be polite to Elder Sui." When she mentioned Elder Sui, the corners of the young girl's mouth curled into a smile. Then, she seemed to have thought of something, and her expression changed slightly. She did not say much, and finally said, "Elder Sui is not here these days. He has asked me to keep an eye on you. If you want to thank him, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few days. At most. F above TC in NTT2 thank you for saving me. I should thank you in person." Hearing this, Sui nodded. Elder Sui had saved him, and it was reasonable that he should thank him in person. "Then you can rest here for the next few days. Anyway, there are usually no outsiders on the 36 Sword Peak. You can also walk around here, as long as you don't go too far." The young girl said, "Thank you very much." Only then did Sui look around the room. Sui heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the broken sword lying quietly beside the bed. This broken sword was not ordinary. Fortunately, it had not been lost. "You're welcome." The young girl smiled, and the dimples on her cheeks became more obvious. As if they could speak, she asked Sui, By the way, my name is Su Jiahui. What's your name? Su-yi. Su-yi replied. Worried about Su Tianke, Su-yi immediately asked Su Jiahui if Elder Su had seen Su Tianke when he brought him back. A chicken. Su Jiahui shook her head, looked at Su-yi, and said with some doubt, No, Elder Su only brought you back. Hearing this, Su-yi's heart sank. He did not know how Su Tianke was, whether he was dead or alive. That bald chicken had been with him for so long. Although it had been nagging and nagging, Su-yi was worried because they had narrowly escaped death together many times. Were you hunted down by your enemies? It's a miracle that you're still alive with such serious injuries. Su Jiahui looked at Su-yi with curiosity. She said, If you have enemies outside, you can ask Elder Su to take you in at Shunjian Gate. Even if you can't become an outer disciple, he can protect you even as a servant. Chapter 341. You can say that. We'll see when the time comes. Su-yi faintly smiled. He did not know how to explain it. However, when he heard the words Divine Sword Sect, he felt a sense of familiarity. He seemed to have an impression of it. I still have things to do. You can rest here. If there's anything you need, you can tell me. Su Jiahui left. She still had things to deal with. Since Su-yi looked fine, she didn't need to worry about him. Su-yi nodded. Looking at the back of the girl, he was still thinking about the origin of Shunjian Gate. Vaguely, Su-yi seemed to have an impression of Shunjian Gate. 6 continents, 3 continents, 1 ocean, 1 mountain, 2 religions, 3 sects, and 4 factions. The 6 continents were Sky Dragon Continent, Tying Continent, Immortal Sword Continent, Divine Tiger Continent, Taichin Continent, and Boundless Continent. On every continent, there was a sect that was the strongest. On the Sky Dragon Continent, it was rumored that the strongest sect was Sky Dragon Sect. On the Taiyang Continent, it was Taiyang Sect. On the Immortal Sword Continent, it was Immortal Sword Sect. On the Divine Tiger Continent, it was Divine Tiger Sect. On the Taichin Continent, it was Taichin Sect. On the Boundless Continent, it was Boundless Sect. The 3 continents were Middle Continent, Cloud Continent, and Serenity Continent. On Middle Continent, the strongest sect was Sacred Mountain. On Cloud Continent, it was Boundless Sect. Yen Y, first dollar on Serenity Continent. It was Demon Subduing Sect. On the 1 ocean, it was the territory of Gemini Sect. On the 1 mountain, 2 religions, 3 sects, 4 factions. Sacred Mountain, Gemini Sect, Limitless Sect, Sky Dragon Sect, Tying Sect, Immortal Sword Sect, Divine Tiger Sect, Boundless Sect, Taichin Sect, and Demon Subduing Sect. Shunjian Gate wasn't in the top 10, but in Su-yi's mind, there was an impression of Shunjian Gate. After thinking for a while, Su-yi couldn't remember anything. So, he didn't think too much about it. After Su Jiahui left, Su-yi checked his injuries. The Diamond Body and Primeval Supreme Art had twice the effect of half the effort in healing. But the most important thing this time was that the healing pills and ointment were not ordinary things. In addition to Elder Su's healing, it was because of this that he was able to recover so quickly. His injuries were almost completely healed. His mind was filled with souls. The mysterious ball of light was quietly entrenched. Everything was fine. Su-yi was worried about Su Tianke. He didn't know if Su Tianke was still alive. In his mind, the graceful figure of the 9 Lives Demon Cat appeared. In the end, he could vaguely see the body of the 9 Lives Demon Cat explode. She was probably dead. Phew. Su-yi took a deep breath and stopped thinking about it. After thanking Elder Su of the Shunjian Gate, he left for the Chaos Realm. He also wanted to find Su Tianke while he was at it. He hoped that the 9 Lives Demon Cat was still alive. After all, the 9 Lives Demon Cat had ended up like this because of him. After a while, Su-yi carried the broken sword on his back and left the room. He wanted to look around. Su Jiahui also told him that this was the 36th peak of the Shunjian Gate. Not many people would come here. It would be fine as long as he didn't go too far. When he walked out of the room, Su-yi's eyes suddenly twitched. The view in front of him suddenly widened. He was at the peak of a mountain, and the mountains were majestic and undulating. The whole mountain was lush and verdant, accompanied by a light yellow color and intertwined with a beautiful indigo. It was like a vast landscape painting. The mountain peak reached into the clouds. The clouds lingered and spread out. It was a magnificent sight. The undulating mountains, precipitous cliffs, protruding stone bones, clear streams, secluded paths, winding bridges, overlapping mountains, and towering trees. Looking into the distance, the majestic mountains were faintly discernible in the clouds. Ancient trees towered into the sky. Red walls and yellow tiles emerged from the lush mountains. The surroundings were filled with energy. Vaguely, there seemed to be the sound of guqin and the tinkling of bells. It made one feel as if they were in a fairyland. "So beautiful!" Suti exclaimed. This was definitely not an ordinary place. It was beautiful and majestic like a fairyland. From the surrounding energy of heaven and earth, this place was not something an ordinary mountain gate could possess. It could be seen that the Shunjian gate was also not ordinary. In the mountains and forests, there were many ancient buildings. There were strange flowers and plants, and spiritual birds dancing in the air. He walked along the mountain. After surviving the disaster, he had healed for several days and breathed in the fresh air. The scenery was pleasant and picturesque. Unknowingly, a simple and unadorned building appeared in front of Su Yi's eyes. Don't go too far. After all, this is the 36th Sword Peak. How dare you come here and behave so atrociously? Such a voice came from the front and fell into Su Yi's ears. Frowning slightly, Su Yi wanted to turn around and leave. This was the Xinjiang Gate. No matter what, as an outsider, it was better for him to stay away. "Leave, or I won't be polite to you." Just as Su Yi was about to turn around and leave, a familiar voice sounded. It seemed to be Su Jiahui's voice. Su Jiahui. Su Yi frowned slightly. Listening to Su Jiahui's voice, it seemed to be a little troublesome. The simple courtyard was connected. The bluestone floor was mottled, as if it had borne the vicissitudes of time. There were more than a dozen young men and women. The oldest looked to be 17 or 18 years old, while the youngest was 14 or 15 years old. Everyone's clothes were almost the same, with the same emblem pattern on their clothes. At this moment, these dozen young men and women had dignified expressions. They were clustered together, and a few of them were pale. A few swords were scattered on the ground, and there was blood at the corner of their mouths. It seemed that they had just suffered a great loss. In the lead was a 15 or 16-year-old young man. He was not tall, but he was very sturdy. His appearance was ordinary, but his eyes were bright, revealing a sense of stubbornness. Beside the young man, Su Jiahui's delicate and pretty face stared unhappily at the 5 young men in front of her. They were all about 17 or 18 years old. The young man who seemed to be the leader was wearing the same clothes as everyone else, but his expression was very unpleasant. He looked at Su Jiahui and the rest and sneered. "Don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Hand over the energy pills in your hands, or else I won't be polite to you today. Teng Ming, don't go overboard. The energy pills were given to us by the sect. Aren't you afraid that the warden will blame you for trying to snatch them?" The short young man beside Su Jiahui was furious, but he knew that he was no match for them and had to endure. You can't take care of the energy pills, so who can you blame? Anyway, it's a waste to give the energy pills to you. If you have the ability, go ahead and complain. The young man who was called Teng Ming did not care and did not take the young man seriously at all. "Teng Ming, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because your brother is an inner sect disciple. This is the 36th Sword Peak, and you came here without permission. If Elder Su finds out, you know the consequences." Su Jiahui gritted her teeth and glared at Teng Ming. When Teng Ming and the other young men heard Su Jiahui's words, the words Elder Su made them shudder. They could not help but shudder for no reason, and a chill crawled up their hearts. Don't use Elder Su to scare us. Everyone in Shunjian Gate knows what kind of place the 36th Sword Peak is. There are no inner sect disciples at all. Furthermore, who do you think you are? You're just unlucky to be doing odd jobs here. I'm afraid that you won't even see Elder Su. Do you think that Elder Su will stand up for you? Furthermore, I'm afraid that Elder Su isn't even in Shunjin Gate. Chapter 342. What kind of status did Elder Su have? Why would he stand up for these outer sex servants? What's more, everyone knew that Elder Su had a strange temper. He didn't spend much time in Shunjin Gate. Upon hearing Teng Ming's words, the remaining young men, who were initially fearful, relaxed once again and sneered. Although no one in the sect dared to provoke the dignified Elder Su, why would he help a few odd-job disciples? When Su Jiahui saw that Teng Ming and the others were not bothered and were determined to snatch everyone's soul-nurturing pills, her face turned grave. Although there were many of them, these 5 disciples had entered the sect a year earlier than them, and their strength was much stronger than them. There were many people here, but they were no match for them. Don't dawdle. Hand over all the energy cultivation pills you have. Why are you refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit? Teng Ming looked at Su Jiahui and the others and sneered. His aura fluctuated as he slowly walked forward. His eyes were filled with disdain as he did not take these people seriously. That's right. O above G in section R. You want to snatch the Peiyuan Dan? I'll fight you. The short and stocky young man's eyes were filled with anger. Yuan Qi immediately swept out from his body. The golden metal Yuan Qi was resplendent and had a sharp aura. He took a step forward and immediately pounced forward. His hand directly punched towards Teng Ming. This punch contained a kind of martial skill, and it was quite imposing. The metal element power was extremely sharp, generating a series of swishing noises in the air. Zhang Qing, you're overestimating yourself. Since you refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit, I'll fulfill your wish. At this moment, Teng Ming did not pay any attention to the sturdy young man's punch. There was a faint sneer on his face as he took a step forward. Before the former's punch could land, he swiftly dodged to the side. A punch swept past Teng Ming's shoulder. A sharp force whistled and messed up the hair beside his ears. However, at this moment, Teng Ming's face darkened, and he swiftly kicked the young man called Zhang Qing's lower abdomen. Bang! With a faint muffled sound, Zhang Qing's body immediately curled up, and blood spurted out from her mouth. Zhang Qing, be careful. Teng Ming, you're too despicable. Su Jiahui shouted, and her body was filled with vital qi. She reached out her fair hand, and her fingers were long and slender. Her vital qi gathered, and a green light fluctuated as she slapped Teng Ming. Junior Sister Jiahui, there is no need to stick your neck out for these useless guys. If you're willing, I will naturally not ask Junior Sister Jiahui for the energy cultivation pill. When I become an inner disciple, I will also find a way to make Junior Sister Jiahui an inner disciple. While Teng Ming spoke, his hand was not empty. He shook his arm and struck out a palm strike at Su Jiahui with an imposing manner. Qila, 2 gusts of wind collided with each other as the palms collided and separated upon contact. A strong wind spread out, causing sand and stones to fly in all directions. Ding ding. Su Huixin's footsteps staggered. Her young and tender body took a few steps back before she stabilized herself. Her delicate and pretty face was a little pale. This time, Teng Ming also took a step back from the impact, and a flash of light could be seen on his face. Stop talking nonsense. If I want to become an inner sect disciple, I will fight for it myself. You should become an inner sect disciple first. Su Jiahui stabilized her body and looked at Teng Ming. She gritted her teeth, and the aura on her body became denser. She did not hold back her aura at all. Upon hearing Su Jiahui's words, Teng Ming's face turned gloomy. I heard that Junior Sister Jiahui is quite talented. Since that's the case, let's test it out. As soon as Teng Ming finished his sentence, he slowly lifted his right leg and stomped it down. Boom! At that instant, a low energy rumble was heard from Teng Ming's foot. Vital qi waves surged, and the aura of a 9th level essence soul swept out. The momentum was obviously much stronger than Su Jiahui's aura. Teng Ming sneered. I must enter the inner sect this time, or my chances will become increasingly slim. If I can obtain a few more essence-strengthening pills and increase my cultivation, I'll have a higher chance of entering the inner sect. Junior sister Jiahui, since you don't know how to appreciate favors, don't blame me for not showing mercy to you. As soon as he finished speaking, the transparent figure swept out in a straight line and charged towards Su Jiahui. You're only at the 8th level essence soul realm. Although you're extraordinary, I'm already at the 9th level essence soul realm. Every level is a mountain. Junior sister Jiahui, you're not my match. In the blink of an eye, Teng Ming appeared in front of Su Jiahui. A green light flickered in his hand, and he clenched his fist that was wrapped in a green radiance. The air whistled as he blasted his fist towards Su Jiahui. Su Jiahui bit her red lips, and there was a kind of determination on her delicate face. She raised her fist and blasted it toward Teng Ming, which collided with his fist. Bang! When the two fists collided, a muffled sound was immediately heard. Green and green light fluctuated, and a strong wind that was mixed with vitality swept out. Whoosh! Su Jiahui's feet rubbed against the ground as she was forced to retreat. It was difficult for her to resist. I've said that you're not my match. Teng Ming sneered. His body shook slightly, and he stabilized his body after taking half a step back. Immediately after, he closed in on her and formed a hand seal. A finger seal that was condensed from green vitality swept out. Whoosh! Wrapped in vitality, the finger seal was like an electric arc. It whistled sharply through the air and was as fast as lightning. It was about to sweep into Su Jiahui's shoulder. Su Jiahui was in the midst of retreating, and it was impossible for her to avoid it. It was also impossible for her to resist it. Her complexion changed greatly, and her delicate and pale face lost all color. Junior sister Jiahui, be careful. Zhang Qing and the other young men and women were also shocked. They cried out in alarm, but they were powerless to help as they were not Teng Ming's match. Whoosh! Just as the tricky finger seal that contained a swift and fierce wind was about to sweep into Su Jiahui's shoulder, a gray figure suddenly appeared. He waved his hand and swept his long sleeve, causing the tricky and fierce finger seal to disappear right in front of him. Su Jiahui was the first to be surprised by the sudden change. Su Jiahui stopped retreating and looked up. The figure in front of her had a special temperament. It was as tall as a spear and as lofty as a mountain. The figure was so familiar that Su Jiahui's eyes lit up. Everyone's eyes fell on the figure that suddenly appeared. It was a young man who was about 16 or 17 years old. His long black hair draped over his shoulders, and his skin was bronze, but it gave off a warm feeling like jade. The young man's face was angular, and he carried an extremely attractive broken sword on his back. It was rusty and looked like a piece of scrap metal that was dug out from somewhere. The person who came was Su Yi. He wanted to leave, as this was the Shunjian Gate, and he did not want to cause trouble. Chapter 343. Miss Jiahui, are you all right? Su Yi's gaze swept the surroundings before he turned around and asked Su Jiahui. Judging from her expression and sensing the fluctuation of her aura, she had suffered a small loss, but it shouldn't be too serious. I'm fine, thank you. Su Jiahui was slightly astonished. She never expected Su Yi to suddenly appear, and even more so, she never expected Su Yi to lend a hand. Judging from a situation of the former's attack earlier, he was able to easily resist Teng Ming, and his strength was unfathomable. Junior sister Jiahui, are you all right? Zhang Qing and the other youths ran over. They were slightly relieved when they saw that Su Jiahui was fine, but all of them were curiously sizing up Su Yi. No wonder you became so arrogant. It turns out that a newcomer has arrived. An indifferent voice was very gloomy as it came out from Teng Ming's mouth. His gloomy eyes coldly sized up Su Yi. All of you can leave. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. Su Yi turned around again and looked at Teng Ming as he spoke. His gaze swept across Teng Ming and the other four indifferently. They seemed to be at the 8th or 9th level of the Essence Soul stage, and they were all 17 or 18 years old. However, such a cultivation seemed rather ordinary in Su Yi's eyes. When he heard this, Teng Ming was stunned as he looked at Su Yi. After that, he laughed gloomily with a cold gaze. Judging from his clothes, he should be an outer court disciple. But when the laughter stopped, Tung Ming stared at Su Yi and said, "Kid, you're new to the 36th Sword Peak, right?" What boastful tone. "Do you know who I am?" "I'm new. I really don't know who you are." Su Yi said indifferently. "He's called Tung Ming. He joined the sect 2 years earlier than us. His brother is called Tung Guang. He's an inner court disciple and is extremely favored in the sect." Su Jiahui, who was beside Su Yi, said softly, "This Tung Ming often bullies others just because his brother is an inner sect disciple. He especially bullies us junior brothers and sisters. This time, he wants to snatch our elixirs again." "There's no need to mutter. It turns out that you're really new here. Do you think that you'll be able to make a name for yourself after arriving at the 36th Sword Peak? Since you're also an outer disciple, you should have some energy-enhancing pills. Hand them over, and I'll let you suffer less. Otherwise, I'll let you know what it means to refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit." Tung Ming looked displeased when he saw Su Jiahui whispering something softly. He had never been afraid of an outer sect disciple. That brat seemed to have some ability, but could it be that he was really above him? "I said you can leave." Sui looked calm. This kind of thing happened everywhere. This was Shunjian Gate's matter and had nothing to do with him, so he did not plan to bother about it. It was only because of Su Jiahui that Su Yi had to make a move. However, he did not want to cause trouble at Shunjian Gate. Tung Ming could no longer maintain his composure when he saw Su Yi's indifference. It seemed like Su Yi did not take him a heart at all. Boom! Tung Ming's face was gloomy and green energy filled his body. At that moment, the energy in his body had been circulated to the extreme. Clang! The sound of metal clashing resounded. A treasure sword appeared in Tung Ming's hand. His energy wrapped around the treasure sword, as if it was covered with a layer of green light. A sword ray swept out. "Greenwood sword technique," Tung Ming shouted coldly. Subsequently, the treasure sword wrapped in green light slashed towards Su Yi with a force that could split a mountain. The sword was a spiritual weapon, so the sword technique was quite extraordinary. The sword ray was dazzling. Wherever it passed, the void would tremble, and there was a whooshing sound in the air. Su Yi, be careful. This is a general-grade martial skill. When the sword ray slashed out, Su Jiahui's eyes instantly turned grave, and she turned pale. This was a general-grade martial skill. Tung Ming obtained this general-grade martial skill through his brother's relationship. Besides Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing and the other young men and women were shocked. Their hearts were in their throats because of Su Yi. It was said that the young man, who was about the same age as them, was on the verge of death 3 days ago. Would he be Tung Ming's opponent now? Even though they're from the same sect, he's still so ruthless. It seems like he's used to bullying others. Just as everyone was on tenterhooks, Su Yi spoke indifferently. At the same time, the sword light pierced through Tung Ming's body. Nonetheless, the strange thing was that not a single drop of blood splattered. Tung Ming's figure became blurry as though it was an illusion. Tung Ming, who was originally sneering, suddenly felt his heart tremble for no reason. Before he could react, that familiar figure had already appeared beside him. He could only watch helplessly as the former's fist enlarged in his eyes. Bang! When the fist landed on Tung Ming's armpit, a dull sound of primordial qi was heard. Ah! A miserable shriek came from Tung Ming's mouth. His voice was miserable. Clang, clang. The treasure sword in Tung Ming's hand fell to the ground. His body was also sent flying in a straight line before he crashed hard on the ground. Puff! Blood flowed out of Tung Ming's mouth. When he struggled to get up, his right hand, which was holding the sword earlier, drooped down powerlessly. His face was ghastly pale, and his eyes were filled with shock. Tung Ming was appalled. He was defeated in one move and was severely injured. His right arm was fractured, and it would be difficult for him to recover without recuperating for 1 or 2 months. Attack! Attack together! Don't let that fella go! A cold and sharp voice was heard coming from Tung Ming's mouth. He stared at Su Yi with a cold look in his eyes. He definitely would not let that fella go. The remaining 4 young men were initially appalled, and their eyes were trembling. However, after hearing Tong Ming's words, they hesitated for a moment. They looked at each other and gritted their teeth. A treasure sword appeared in their hands, and their auras, which were barely at the 8th or 9th level of the Essence Soul realm, surged. 4 sword lights flashed at Su Yi at the same time. The 4 young men did not believe that they could not do anything to the young fellow if they attacked together. Everything happened very quickly. The 4 treasure swords, which were wrapped in primordial chi, spread sharp sword chis and instantly enveloped Su Yi. Break, bang, bang, bang. At this moment, a figure flashed past, and 4 dull sounds were heard. For shrill cries were heard as the 4 treasure swords fell to the ground. The 4 young men were sent flying and crashed to the ground in a tragic manner. They hugged their lower abdomens and rolled around in pain. Zhang Qing and the other young men and women were dumbfounded when they saw this. They could not come back to their senses, and they were dumbfounded. Tong Ming was also dumbfounded. His eyes twitched hard as he was appalled. He initially thought that as formidable as Yang Ming was, the 4 of them would be able to deal with him if they joined forces. Who knew? Tong Ming did not expect that the 4 of them would cry for their parents in one move when they joined forces. They were not a match for Yang Ming at all. If you don't leave now, you won't end up like this. Su Yi's face darkened slightly when he looked at Tong Ming and the other 4 young men. Chapter 344. Brat, I'm not done with you. You'll pay the price. However, Tong Ming turned around and left with a cold expression after he walked a few meters away. Su Yi did not care. With this kind of strength, they were not much of a threat to him. Ku. At this moment, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others finally came back to their senses when they saw Tong Ming and the other 4 leaving in a panic. They secretly gasped. Then, everyone looked at Su Yi in a different light. In particular, Zhang Qing and the others were secretly shocked as they carefully sized up Su Yi. Was this really the severely injured young man who was brought back by Elder Su 3 days ago? Are you all right? Su Jiahui came back to her senses and looked at Su Yi in front of her. Her shock was indescribable. She was also carefully sizing up Su Yi, as if she wanted to know if Su Yi was injured or not. I'm fine. Are all of you all right? Su Yi smiled. We're all fine. Thank you for your help. The young man named Zhang Qing immediately spoke. He had heard Su Jiahui mention Su Yi before. At this moment, he looked at the young man named Su Yi in front of him and saw that he was wearing the clothes that he had received from the outer court disciples. Naturally, he could not be mistaken. Su Yi smiled and nodded. He sensed the aura on everyone's body. They were all around the 6th level of the Essence Soul realm. This kind of talent could only be considered as barely passable. The average age of the Tian Yao School's disciples was much stronger than the young men and women in front of him. All right, my name is Zhang Qing. I'm an outer court disciple of the Xinjian Gate. Zhang Qing had a smile in his eyes. Although he was injured, he was very enthusiastic. My name is Su Yi. Hearing this, Su Yi smiled and nodded to express his gratitude. He heard from Su Jiahui that the Xinjian Gate disciple robe he was wearing was collected by this disciple named Zhang Qing. I know your name. You're about the same age as us, but you're much stronger than us. May I ask if you're the disciple that Elder Su brought back? After saying this, Zhang Qing shook his head and smiled bitterly. How could Elder Su accept a disciple? That was impossible. He asked curiously, I wonder which sect Brother Su Yi is from. Your strength is so powerful. I'm just a loose cultivator. I was accidentally saved by Elder Su and brought here. Su, he didn't want to talk too much about himself. He changed the topic and asked, You are all from the same sect. Why were those people so arrogant and wanted to snatch your medicinal pills? Although this kind of thing happened everywhere and they were in the sect, it wasn't hard for Su Yi to imagine. This was a world where the strong preyed on the weak and strength was respected. This was even more so in the barbaric demon forest. Su Yi had experienced even more chaotic situations. However, from what he saw just now, Su Yi felt that the youth named Tong Ming seemed to be a little too arrogant. He didn't hold back when he attacked his fellow disciples. That Tung Ming is too despicable. He often bullies us just because his brother is an inner sect disciple. This isn't the first time he snatched our medicinal pills. However, this time, he wanted to snatch the foundation nurturing pill that is only distributed to us outer sect disciples every half a year. We outer sect disciples receive the foundation nurturing pill every half a year. It can strengthen our essence and increase our chances of breaking through to the Yuan profound realm. I reckon that he wants to take this opportunity to break through and obtain the opportunity to become an inner sect disciple in the large competition. When Tung Ming was mentioned, Zhang Qing's eyes were filled with anger. This wasn't the first time they were bullied by Tung Ming, and many of their medicinal pills were snatched away. However, the foundation nurturing pill this time couldn't be snatched away. The sect would only distribute the foundation nurturing pill to outer sect disciples every half a year. It was far from being comparable to inner sect disciples. Tung Ming has always been notorious. Many outer sect disciples are angry but don't dare to speak up. Tung Ming has an elder brother called Tung Guan. He is an inner sect disciple in the sect and is very favored by an elder. It is said that he has a high chance of becoming a direct disciple. This is why he dares to do whatever he wants and bully us. The group of disciples were all talking at once. When Tung Ming was mentioned, they all gnashed their teeth in anger. Every one of them had been bullied and robbed by Tung Ming before. Could it be that no one in the sect cares about this? He was slightly puzzled. Although this wasn't a big deal, if a disciple went overboard, there would be someone to take care of it. Hearing this, the group of disciples started to hesitate. Seeing this, Su Jiahui smiled bitterly and said to Su Yi, "If it was any other peak, Tung Ming wouldn't dare to come up the mountain to snatch it. However, our 36-sword peak is a little special." Hearing Su Jiahui's words, Zhang Qing and the other disciples sighed inwardly. Why is that? Seeing everyone's reaction, Su Yi was even more curious. He also wanted to find out the location of Shunjian Gate from Su Jiahui and the others. He didn't know how far it was from the Chaos region, so that he could make plans in advance. Subsequently, from Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the other disciples, Su Yi learned a lot about Shunjian Gate. Just as Su Yi expected, Shunjian Gate was indeed extraordinary. It was powerful and had many experts. In Shunjian Gate, there were 72 peaks. The terrain was vast and stretched for hundreds of miles. The 72 peaks were divided into Tianjian Peak, Songjian Peak, Lingjian Peak, 15 Xinjian Peak, 18 Dao Sword Peak, and the remaining 36 Sword Peaks. The remaining 36 Sword Peaks were named by numbers. The first Sword Peak, second Sword Peak, all the way to the 36th Sword Peak. Tianjian Peak was the main peak of Shunjian Gate. Usually, only the qualified disciples and elders could step into the peak when the gate leader called for a meeting. Songjian Peak was the place where Shunjian Gate collected martial skills, sword skills, and treasured swords. Only the qualified disciples could step into the peak. Lingjian Peak was the place where Shunjian Gate held grand events. Usually, the grand events and the disciples' duels were held on Lingjian Peak. It was said that Lingjian Peak was protected by an expert. No matter how strong one was, they couldn't destroy it. The 15 Xinjian peaks were full of heaven and earth energy. They were the places where some of Shunjian Gate's senior brothers and sisters practiced. The 18 Dao sword peaks were even more mysterious. It was said that the 18 sword peaks were occupied by the top experts of Shunjian Gate. Occasionally, only the direct disciples of Shunjian Gate could step into the peaks and practice in seclusion for a period of time. The position of direct disciples in Shunjian Gate was much higher than that of the inner disciples. The so-called direct disciples were the disciples who were accepted by at least the elders in Shunjian Gate. They were all direct disciples of Shunjian Gate. They were powerful and had a high status. 36 sword peaks, 36 mountains, and 36 elders of the divine sword sect overseeing them. On the 36 sword peaks, there were both inner and outer disciples. As long as the inner disciples were responsible for practicing every day, the gate would provide them with cultivation resources. Chapter 345. Moreover, the outer sect disciples were also responsible for various chores every day. Only after the chores were completed would they have time to cultivate. On each of the 36 sword peaks, there were inner sect disciples and outer sect disciples. All the outer sect disciples wanted to go to the 36 sword peaks, even if they had to do some chores every day. Firstly, they could get closer to the inner sect disciples, and if they were lucky, they could even get some guidance. Secondly, if they could gain the favor of the elders, their chances of becoming an inner sect disciple would be much higher. However, among the 36 sword peaks, the 36th sword peak was a little peculiar. On the other sword peaks, there were many inner and outer sect disciples, bustling with activity every day. Here, however, it was cold and cheerless. On this 36th sword peak, Elder Sue was overseeing it, but there were no inner sect disciples, let alone personal disciples. Many of the new disciples had thought that they would be able to be like the outer sect disciples on the other peaks upon coming to the 36th sword peak, having the chance to receive guidance from the inner sect disciples and gain the appreciation of the elders. But after they arrived, they found out that on these 36 sword peaks, they were purely chores. Every day, they had to be responsible for the various chores within the 36 sword peaks, but they had no chance at all. Over time, they would even be bullied by the disciples on the other peaks. Originally, Zhang Qing and the others had come to the 36th sword peak with over 100 people, but in the end, only a dozen or so people remained. No one was willing to continue staying here. It was said that all this was because Elder Su never accepted any disciples and was a lone wolf. In Shunjian Gate, someone had once been dissatisfied with Elder Su for not accepting any disciples, but still occupying the 36th peak. In the end, Elder Su had chased after that person and beat him up. If not for the sect leader stepping in, that person would probably have been destroyed by Elder Su. In addition, with Elder Su's usual temper, no one dared to provoke him. Since then, although Elder Su did not accept any disciples, no one dared to say anything about him occupying the 36th sword peak alone. Although they recognized him, they did not dare to express it. Xinjiang Gate, located in Zhong Province, is one of the top factions in the entire Zhong Province. Su, he had obtained this information from Sun Qing and Su Jiaowei. Central Continent. Su Yi's heart trembled. In the Central Continent, there were 1 mountain, 2 religions, 3 sects, and 4 groups. They were the strongest forces in the 6 continents, 3 continents, and 1 ocean. The Saint Mountain was located in the Central Continent and was the strongest force in the Central Continent. Su, he didn't expect that after so many twists and turns, he would be so close to the sacred mountain. This made him feel a different kind of emotion. There will be a day when I will step onto the sacred mountain. A moment later, Su, he muttered to himself as a red light fluctuated in his eyes. All you have to be careful. Teng Ming might not let this matter rest. Su, he said to the crowd. Don't worry, Teng Ming is already injured. At the very least, he won't be able to do anything to us in the short term. Su Jiaowei nodded and then asked Su Yi. In fact, there are several mountains around the 36th sword peak. They all belong to the 36th sword peak. The scenery is good. If you are bored, you can walk around. However, you can't go to other places in the sect. Otherwise, it will be troublesome. Thank you. So he nodded and left. He is so powerful. I wonder where he came from. The shock in the hearts of Sun Qing and the other disciples did not dissipate for a long time. This youth, who was about the same age as them, actually had such a powerful strength. So he walked around and looked around. This was the Shunjian Gate, a first-class force in the central region. Although he couldn't walk around, he could at least see the surroundings. The scenery was beautiful and ancient. There were spiritual beasts and spiritual beasts flying around. For hours later, no one knew where Su Yi had wandered off to. Just as Su Jiaowei had said, there was really no one in the 36th sword peak. There was a clear blue sky and a clear blue lake in the middle of the peak. A graceful figure stepped on the surface of the lake like a fairy. Her figure was light and ethereal. Her black hair was draped over her shoulders, and her orange robe fluttered in the wind. She had an otherworldly temperament, and she was like a fairy. The woman should be young. She was practicing her sword. Sword light flashed. Her face was calm, and her red lips were tender. Her eyes were as clear as water. Her reflection in the lake was like a mist. Sword light flashed, and her figure swayed. Her figure was graceful and beautiful. The woman's body was sparkling and translucent. In the lake, the woman and the sword were like nature itself. It was like a painting. Swoosh, swoosh. The sword light was slow, but every sword light swept out and drew an arc in the void. It was as if it could make people sink into it. The sword light sprinkled light rain and drifted on the lake. From afar, it looked like countless petals were revolving around her. It made her fairy-like temperament even more ethereal and ethereal. She was like a fairy descending from the ninth heaven. People who looked at her from afar would feel ashamed of their inferiority and would not dare to get close. There seems to be someone. On the mountainside, Su-Yi slightly raised his head and stopped. He felt a fluctuation of aura. It didn't seem like there was a fight, but someone was cultivating. This was the Xinjiang Gate, a first-rate force in Zhongzhou. It was only below the Sacred Mountain. Su-Yi pondered. He wanted to see the real strength of the Xinjiang Gate's disciples. Teng Ming, Sun Qing, and the others were only outer disciples after all. They could not represent the real strength of the Xinjiang Gate. Hiss! Suddenly, the shadow of a beast appeared on the rock in front of him. It flicked its tongue and stared at Su-Yi. It was a huge python. Its whole body was black, and its head was as ferocious as a dragon. Half of its body stood upright on the rock. Its eyes emitted a faint light, mixed with a faint golden color. It was as translucent as jade. The huge snake's black wings spread slightly and emitted a faint black light. It was deep and shiny. Boom! The appearance of such a huge snake was accompanied by a mighty aura. It made people's hearts tremble and their souls throb for no reason. Nine-Hell Snake. When such a huge black snake appeared, Su-Yi subconsciously took a few steps back. He looked at the snake and couldn't help but tremble. It was a Nine-Hell Snake cub. The Nine-Hell Snake was an expert of the demon race. Its bloodline was comparable to the Azure Wave Gold Beast. Trespassing here? Are you courting death? The Nine-Hell Snake stared at Su-Yi from above. Its eyes were filled with warning. A terrifying aura spread out, causing people's hearts to tremble. I didn't mean to offend you. Su-Yi could understand the beast language. The Nine-Hell Snake's aura was only at the second level of the demon spirit realm. However, the person behind the Nine-Hell Snake cub was definitely not simple in the Xinjiang Gate. Su-Yi didn't want to get into trouble. Human, you didn't understand my words? Hearing Su-Yi's words, the Nine-Hell Snake's eyes flickered with a hint of golden color. It was shocked. Goodbye. Su-Yi turned around. He didn't want to delay any longer. He didn't want to alarm the person behind the Nine-Hell Snake. Chapter 346. Seeing this, the Nine-Hell Snake refused to give up. It swooped down and twisted half of its body to block in front of Su-Yi. The Nine-Hell Snake flapped its black wings slightly, and a terrifying aura filled the air, directly locking on to Su-Yi. The terrifying aura was a warning, and its eyes made people's hearts palpitate. A fishy smell came to his face, making people tremble. Get out of my way! Su-Yi's eyes darkened. The Nine-Hell Snake refused to give up and wanted to pester him. The aura of the Origin Supreme technique was released from his body. Hiss! When such a majestic and destructive aura spread out from Su-Yi's body, the Nine-Hell Snake's eyes, which were originally overbearing, were suddenly replaced with fear and horror. Swish! The Nine-Hell Snake's body suddenly retreated, and its mouth made a hiss sound, trembling with fear. How dare you bully my little M.O.? A delicate voice came, and a graceful figure suddenly swept out from the front and appeared in front of the Nine-Hell Snake. She was a young girl with a graceful and slender figure, about 16 or 17 years old. The girl was about the same age as Su-Yi. Her black hair was tied behind her head, and her orange clothes were elegant. She had an otherworldly temperament, like a fairy, but a few strands of long hair fell from her forehead to one side, adding a bit of wild temperament. The girl's red lips were delicate, and her eyes were clear like water. At this moment, although there was no smile on her face, she gave people a kind of touching beauty. Seeing the girl coming, the nine-hell snake immediately retreated behind the girl, looking very shocked. Its eyes looked at Sue-Yi, and there was still a surge of fear. "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I'll leave now." Looking at the beautiful girl in front of him, Sue-Yi's eyes secretly moved, and he felt an extremely powerful aura. This girl was not ordinary. "An outer disciple dares to scare my little M.O. Which sore peak are you from?" The young girl looked at Sue-Yi and the clothes he was wearing. She scolded him lightly, and her aura was dignified. "This nine-hell snake is so big. It's more like it's scaring me. I don't need to tell you which sword peak I'm from." Sue-Yi's temper had always been the kind of person who would respect others tenfold. But if you don't give him face, Sue-Yi definitely won't give you face either. This girl's overbearing attitude made Sue-Yi somewhat unhappy. If they were not at Xinjiang Gate, Sue-Yi would not be so patient. As soon as he finished speaking, Sue-Yi no longer paid any attention to the young girl and turned around to leave. Hearing Sue-Yi's words, no one in Xinjiang Gate would dare to do that. Seeing Sue-Yi turn around and leave without any trace of politeness, the girl was stunned. Immediately, the girl's expression changed. There was a surge of primordial chi under her feet. She moved with a wonderful movement skill and swept out. The girl's figure was incredible. In an instant, she blocked in front of Sue-Yi. "You're just an outer disciple. You got guts," the girl said. Her clear eyes were filled with brilliance. She stared at Sue-Yi and carefully sized him up. "Don't go too far. Why are you so aggressive?" Sue-Yi's eyes darkened. He was also angry in his heart. The temper of this young girl in front of him, compared to one of her and Shangguan Shiwei, was not just a little bit worse. Although her face was a disaster level. But Sue-Yi was still suppressing his temper. This was Xinjiang Gate. He could not cause trouble. When Elder Su came back, he would personally thank him and leave. "You have a bit of temper. Don't you know who I am?" The girl looked at Sue-Yi and was stunned. Was this guy in front of her a newcomer to Xinjiang Gate? How dare he talk to her like that? "Is it important who you are?" "It doesn't seem to have anything to do with me," Sue-Yi answered. His expression was calm, but his eyebrows were slightly furrowed. It was clear that he was displeased. Sue-Yi did not wish to be entangled with the girl. He took another step forward and left. "Insolence!" the girl shouted as she shook her arm. Her slender fingers were like jade as they emanated light. Immediately, she slapped at Sue-Yi's shoulder. "Lass, you've gone too far." Sue-Yi's expression changed. Immediately, primordial chi surged out of his body. A scarlet primordial chi surged out like flames. His calm expression was replaced by a pair of eyes that were like lightning. His entire bearing instantly turned majestic. Boom! Sue-Yi shook his arm as he clenched his fist and punched out. This was a martial technique from the Heaven Fei ancient scripture. It came from the savage scripture. This punch brought with it a mighty aura that resembled the roar of a beast. It was accompanied by a blazing and powerful aura that swept out. The girl's unconcerned expression changed drastically. The moment the other party attacked, she knew that she had met an absolute opponent. This outer sect disciple was not simple. Immediately, primordial chi gushed out from her palm as a green light bloomed. Instantly, it clashed with Sue-Yi. Pung! 8 KB genuine chapter YY upper ace. A dull thud resounded as sand and pebbles flew in all directions. Sue-Yi's feet swayed slightly, but the girl staggered and retreated a few steps. Clearly, the girl had underestimated her opponent. The girl was truly moved. The moment she attacked, she knew that the other party was only at the essence spirit realm. Yet, he was so powerful. This caused her heart to stir. "You're not an outer sect disciple. Why are you wearing an outer sect disciple's uniform? Speak." The girl looked at Sue-Yi with a cold and dignified look. Such a fellow was definitely not an outer sect disciple. "I've said it before. It has nothing to do with you," Sue-Yi said. At this moment, he was also quite surprised. This girl was extraordinary. She was definitely the strongest opponent he had ever met among his peers. Compared to Xiongzhan, Hu Qi, and the others, She was obviously more tyrannical. Is this one of the cream of the crop among the Shunjian Gate's younger generation? Su-yi muttered in his heart. This girl who looked about the same age as him was too strong. She gave him an unfathomable feeling. Not going to speak? Then, let me see who you are. As the girl's voice sounded, her slender, jade-like hand swept out once again. Amidst the green, primordial chi, a powerful aura was many times stronger than before. Within the light, several energy beams shot out and wrapped around Su-yi. It was very strange, very strong. Su-yi's heart trembled. This girl was indeed not simple. Boom! In an instant, the aura on Su-yi's body grew even stronger as a powerful aura erupted. Light spread out, blazing and dazzling. Su-yi's skin was sparkling like jade. This was the diamond body. Yuan Qi condensed outwards, dissolving the water attribute Yuan Qi. The girl's eyes turned and her jade-like hand moved. Light spread out and enveloped her body, making her look even more like an immortal, otherworldly. Light condensed in the girl's hand like a sword beam shooting out. It appeared in the void, and the sound of wind breaking could be heard in the air. It was incomparably fierce. Chapter 347. Up until now, Su-yi had never met anyone who could fight with him at the same level. At this moment, Su-yi's fighting spirit was aroused. He did not retreat, but advanced instead. He raised his hand and condensed his Yuan Qi. The two figures suddenly engaged in a fierce battle. Rumble. Yuan Qi surged and light filled the air. Sand and stones flew around, the ground cracked, and boulders exploded. The nine-hell snake was shocked and had already retreated to the side. The more Su-yi fought, the more surprised he became. His opponent's every move had a special charm to it. His attacks were like moving clouds and flowing water, all done in one go. The girl's strength was even more powerful. She was definitely the first person Su-yi had met in his generation so far. At this moment, Su-yi did not know that the girl was even more shocked. The girl felt a great pressure. The boy in front of her was calm and steady, brave and unparalleled. His moves were tricky and strange, but there was also a strong demeanor. These contradicted each other, but in this young man's body, it was as if they were part of nature. In the Shunjian Gate, she had never met such an opponent. Boom! Su-yi's fighting spirit surged. This was the best of the younger generation in the Shunjian Gate. Her cultivation was about the same as his. If he could not defeat her, how could he set foot on the sacred mountain one day? How could he become a strong person in the future? 7 Injuring Fist. Red Flame Palm. Fire Shadow Fist. Su-yi urged his martial arts and made a strong move to suppress the girl. The girl was shocked. In the Shunjian Gate, there was such an opponent. Where did this boy come from? How could he be so strong? Light and Shadow Wave. The girl counterattacked. The surrounding was filled with mist. This was caused by the water attribute Yuan Qi, which turned into a mist vortex. Her graceful figure was reflected in the mist. The girl's figure was graceful in the mist, which made people's hearts tremble. Her momentum was extremely shocking. Very strong. Su-yi sighed in admiration, but he did not feel any pressure. He had not used any of his primordial supreme arch trump cards, nor had he used any of his soul controller abilities. He was confident that he could defeat this girl. The girl had a fiery temper, but after exchanging blows, she became calmer and calmer. The young girl's body was shrouded in mist, condensing into a fierce aura that rushed out and engulfed Su-yi. His body was sparkling and translucent, emitting fluorescent light. Su-yi continued to fight, not showing any signs of being at a disadvantage. The more he fought, the fiercer he became. However, there were no restrictions or seals in the surroundings. It was unable to withstand the battle between the two of them. Bang, bang, bang. Boulders were blasted away, dust flew everywhere, the earth shook, the ground collapsed, and cracks spread out like a spider web. Boom! Su-yi attacked fiercely, his aura exploding. Ancient Crimson Seal. A low shout came from Su-yi's heart. A wave of fire attribute Yuan Qi suddenly rushed out. The blazing aura on his palm suddenly spun, bringing with it a wave of whistling sound. Finally, it gathered together, as if countless flames had gathered together to form a small sea of fire. The aura of the handprint was blazing and terrifying, burning the air. It also brought with it an ancient pressure that swept out. Ancient crimson seal. This was a martial technique in the Savage Scripture. It was also one of the strongest martial techniques in the Savage Scripture. He raised his hand and blasted out a handprint. Suddenly, a blazing aura surged and slapped towards a girl. Spirit wave explosive fist. The girl shouted, her body covered in mist. Her slender white hand clenched tightly, bringing with it a violent force. The girl punched out, and the mist in the sky surged like a dragon soaring into the sky. It immediately collided with Su Yi's fire attribute, Ancient Crimson Seal. Bang, bang. The two collided, forming a huge storm. It was like a hurricane whistling. Sand and stones flew everywhere, and huge cracks appeared on the ground. Why is it getting stronger and stronger? The girl was shocked, and her heart was greatly shaken. Her master had said that there would always be someone better than you. She had always wanted to see it, and now she had seen it. She actually met such a young man here. Her beautiful figure slightly retreated, and the girl looked at Su Yi. Her beautiful eyes were filled with splendor mixed with battle intent. She stretched out her white hand, and a treasured sword was already in her hand. She looked straight at Su Yi and said, "Pull out your sword. Xinjiang Gate. Using swords should be your forte, right?" Su Yi said to himself. This was the Xinjiang Gate, so naturally the disciples of the Xinjiang Gate would be good at using swords. "You are still not enough for me to use swords." Looking at the girl, Su Yi said, last time, he had destroyed another spirit weapon blade, so he didn't have any more suitable blades on him. There wasn't any in his space bag either. $unspecified currency latest chapter T. Section T YQ on G*X Su Yi's words didn't have any other meaning. He couldn't use the broken sword on his back. Every time, he would only use the broken sword on his back when he was in danger. Last time, the broken sword didn't even react, and he almost died. Looking around, Su Yi took a step forward and picked up a 3-foot-long tree branch that was the size of a baby's arm. He shook it and said, "This will do. You are too arrogant." However, Su Yi's words were extremely arrogant in the girl's ears, especially when she saw that Su Yi actually wanted to use a tree branch to deal with her. This was an absolute humiliation. With a cold expression, the girl's face was dignified. Light fluctuated on her body, and the treasured sword in her hand let out a buzzing sound. As the girl's treasured sword continued to slash out, her beauty and fierceness fused together at this moment. It was beautiful and intimidating. Swish, swish, swish. The sword light finally converged into a sword technique. Streaks of sword light swept out from the void and gathered together, revealing a resplendent sword light. Fury sword technique. The girl shouted loudly, and the sword light swept out, slashing straight at Su Yi. Resplendent light erupted, and the sound of the sword was like endless wind and thunder. It was terrifyingly powerful. Wherever it passed, the void surged and the ground trembled. Mad Dragon, 3 blades, second blade, violent dragon whirlwind slash. A roar resounded from the bottom of his heart. Just as the sword light swept over, Su Yi shook the tree branch in his hand. Yuan Qi surged in his meridians and gathered on it, using the tree branch as a blade. Wong. As Yuan Qi poured in, the tree branch trembled. The violent dragon whirlwind slash in Su Yi's hand directly slashed out with the tree branch. Above the tree branch, there was a light like an electric arc, like a crescent moon that streaked across the void. The faint light shadow was like a dragon's shadow that flashed and disappeared. The pressure was fierce and violent. Sand and pebbles flew in all directions, like a violent dragon dancing. The girl's face darkened, using a tree branch as a weapon, but it had such a fierce aura. It was too unbelievable. Chilala, the two collided, and the light was dazzling. The tree branch in Su Yi's hand was shattered in an instant, turning into ashes. Su Yi's face changed. He stepped out with the Fuyao Hunter transformation steps and was immediately forced back. After a few steps, Su Yi stopped. The sword light in front of him extended to the soles of his feet, and a crack in the ground reached the soles of his feet. Only then did it stop abruptly. What a powerful sword technique! Su Yi was secretly moved. This girl's strength was somewhat beyond his expectations. The girl was even more surprised. Her sword was actually unable to gain an advantage against the boy's tree branch. Chapter 348. The girl's eyes then stared at Su Yi, as if she was unwilling to give up and wanted to continue the battle. "What's your name?" Finally, the girl looked at Su Yi and asked. Su Yi as in Su Yi as in Su Yi. Su Yi raised his eyebrows. This girl was really valiant. At this moment, Su Yi's gaze was also fixed on the treasure sword in the girl's hand. His tongue slightly licked his dry lips, and his eyes revealed a strange color. He was tempted. This treasure sword was definitely an extraordinary item. It was much stronger than a spiritual weapon. He estimated that it could be sold for a lot of money. Puff! Hearing Su Yi's words, the girl's originally cold and dignified face suddenly twitched. She almost couldn't help but laugh. For no reason, she felt that this young man in front of her didn't seem so annoying. "Remember, my name is Mu Yao. Next time, when we continue the battle, I won't let you go. Xiao and Mo, let's go." Finally, the girl's voice fell. Her feet touched the ground, and Yuan Qi gushed out. As her figure leaped several times, she landed on the back of the nine-hell snake. The nine-hell snake looked at Su Yi with fear in its eyes. It then spread its wings and flew away. Mu Yao. Looking at the girl's back, the nine-hell snake disappeared into the distance. Su Yi's eyes were still moving. Although Su Yi hadn't used his real strength, he hadn't even used his trump card. But such a girl made Su Yi feel that she hadn't used her real strength just like before. She gave him an unfathomable feeling. The girl's cultivation method seemed to be very special. It suppressed her cultivation, making it difficult for others to detect and spy on her. And Mu Yao's attacks also had the style of a great master. It was smooth and contained many mysteries. These were all things that he didn't have. Su Yi pondered. Perhaps this was the benefit of cultivating in a great sect. With the guidance of a strong master, there were many things that he didn't have to rely on himself to slowly explore. If it's a real battle, I can win. However, Su Yi was confident that if he were to really go all out in a battle, even though his opponent was unfathomable, he would definitely be able to win. This kind of confidence came from his own belief as a powerhouse. Looking up at the sky, the sun was about to set. After tidying up his clothes, Su Yi returned the way he came from. He didn't dare to wander around so as to avoid attracting any more trouble. The mountain peaks towered high, clouds and mist filled the air, and the setting sun fell to the earth. That moment of intercourse sprayed a bright red tide into the sky, dyeing the clouds red. Hiss, hiss. A ninth hell snake flicked its forked tongue as it descended before a quiet courtyard, and its gaze surged with reverence as it faced a beautiful woman in plain clothes before it. Its enormous body shrunk to the size of half a foot before it lay dormant at the side. "Master, your disciple is about to win. Why are you telling your disciple to stop?" Mu Yao angrily stepped forward. Her delicate red lips were even more alluring, as if she wanted to attract people to kiss her. The plain-clothed woman appeared to be in her 50s, but her figure was exquisite. She wore a plain-colored long dress that extended from the hem of her dress to her waist. A light-colored belt tightened around her slender waist, showing off her graceful figure. She gave off an elegant and luxurious feeling. Her jet-black hair was tied into a flowing cloud bun, and there was an emerald jade hairpin in the bun. The beautiful woman's face was like a hibiscus, and she wore a thin layer of makeup. Her beautiful eyebrows were curved like willows, and her bearing was like a serene blue, especially her pair of bright eyes, which were deep and dark, as if they could make people sink into them. Such a beautiful woman must have been a devastatingly beautiful woman when she was young. She was enough to make people fall head over heels for her. Looking at Mu Yao, the beautiful woman smiled and said, "Do you think you will definitely win if you continue to fight?" The young man used a tree branch as a knife, and you didn't have much of an advantage. This, Mu Yao raised her eyebrows, as if she wanted to refute, but she knew very well that the young man was indeed terrifying. She pouted and said, "But I haven't used my real strength. If we continue to fight, he will definitely lose." "Do you think that young man has used his real strength?" The beautiful woman looked at Mu Yao and said, "Look at the first section of the chapter of the Book of Life. This." Mu Yao wanted to say something, but stopped. "As your master said, there's always someone better than you. You have seen it today, and it is a good thing for you." The beautiful woman smiled. "I will definitely defeat that annoying guy." Mu Yao pouted, and her eyes were shining. "Maybe there will be a chance. Now, go into seclusion. It won't be long before the future and glory of Xinjiang Gate depends on you. This time, your competitors are very strong." The beautiful woman's smiling face gradually became serious. "Don't worry, master. I'm not afraid of anyone. If anyone dares to stop me, I will defeat them." Mu Yao spoke. Her expression carried a strand of unswerving determination, and her eyes revealed confidence. Go into seclusion. In the coming days, you are not allowed to go out and make trouble." The beautiful woman looked at Mu Yao and stroked Mu Yao's black hair. Her eyes were full of love. "Master, I am not making trouble. I am very obedient." Mu Yao acted coquettishly and intimately leaned on her master. She pouted, delicate and attractive. After acting coquettishly for a while, Mu Yao left with a 9 hell snake. Her graceful figure skipped and disappeared in the sunset. Looking at Mu Yao's departure, the beautiful woman smiled. Then she looked in the direction of the 36-sword peak and murmured, as if to herself, "Su-yi." At dusk, the setting sun was as red as blood. Su-yi used his primordial chi all the way. The primordial chi under his feet surged, and he secretly used the changing steps. Soon, he returned to the mountain where he stayed. The sunset covered the sky. In the distance, spiritual birds spread their wings and whistled pleasantly. They were bathed in the sunset. Such a scene was even more delightful, making people feel relaxed and happy. "Brother Su-yi, bad news, bad news, Brother Su-yi." Suddenly, from not far away, there was a hurried voice. A figure was rushing over. Su-yi raised his eyebrows. Judging from the voice, it seemed to be Zhang Qing. Soon, the figure arrived in front of Su-yi. It was Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing was panting. Looking at Su-yi, there was a hint of joy on his pale face, but then he became serious again. He panted and said hurriedly, "Brother Su-yi, bad news." "Zhang Qing, what happened? Tell me slowly." Su-yi's heart sank. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong. "They're here again. There are many experts with them. Junior sister Jiehui was heavily injured by them. Everyone is injured. They said that if Brother Su-yi didn't appear, they would cripple junior sister Jiehui's cultivation. They're intersect disciples and don't put us in their eyes at all. If they really cripple our cultivation, the sect won't do anything to them. At most, they'll give a light punishment." Chapter 349. Moreover, they were outer sect disciples of the 36-sword peak that could be bullied by anyone. They were just odd job workers. Tisk, before Zhang Qing could finish speaking, Su-yi's figure had disappeared like a ghost. It was as if he had turned into an afterimage and was already far away. It was still the connected, simple courtyard. The limestone floor was mottled and carried the vicissitudes of time. Some of the young men and women were lying on the ground and were unable to get up. Their mouths were mottled with blood, their faces were pale, and their hair was disheveled. There were also a few who were barely supporting themselves with their swords as they supported each other. Even so, the corners of their mouths were dripping with blood, their hair was disheveled, and their clothes were dyed red with blood. They were in a sorry state and miserable state. Su Jiehui was also in the field. She was drenched in blood, and her hair was stained with blood. Her face was as pale as ash, and she was lying on the ground without the strength to get up. However, the stubbornness in her eyes did not diminish. Su Jiahui, you're refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Do you really think that you can sit back and relax just because that fella is here? I've said that I won't let that fella off. Teng Ming's resentful voice was ear-piercing. He stood next to Su Jiahui and looked down at Su Jiahui with hatred in his eyes. At this moment, Teng Ming's right hand was tied with a bandage. He seemed to have consumed a healing pill, and his pale face was much better. Su Jiahui struggled to sit up. She supported herself with her sword and looked at the 50 over young men in front of her. She glanced at them and said, "You've gone too far. When Elder Su returns, he won't let you off. Elder Su will stand up for you odd job workers." What a joke. Teng Ming sneered. When he saw his bandaged hand, the hatred in his eyes increased. "Teng Ming, is that fella here yet?" Not far away, a young man of about 18 or 19 years old spoke. His face was quite handsome, and he wore a tight-fitting long robe that accentuated his temperament. He could be considered a handsome young man, but there was a hint of gloominess in his eyes. Beside this young man, there were 7 or 8 young men of similar age. They were all dressed differently, but their overall temperament and aura were clearly stronger than the remaining 40 or so youths. Teng Ming immediately turned around when he heard the young man in the tight, long robe speak. He squeezed out a smile on his face and said with a hint of flattery, "Senior Brother Wang Qi, that kid should be here soon. Please teach that kid a lesson and avenge me when the time comes. I have a pretty good relationship with Senior Brother Teng Wang, and we're all brothers of the same sect. You're his younger brother, so I'll naturally help you vent your anger when you're bullied." The young man called Wang Qi nodded faintly, but his gaze towards Teng Ming was filled with disdain. If not for his brother, Teng Guang, why would he stand up for Teng Ming? However, Teng Ming was only an outer sect disciple, and it was a piece of cake for him. When the time came, Teng Guang would owe him a huge favor. Once Teng Guang really became a direct disciple, Teng Ming would naturally benefit from it, and Teng Ming would not suffer loss. Teng Ming was even more confident when he heard Wang Qi's words. That fella dared to injure him, which caused him to suffer a huge loss of face this time. In particular, since his hand was injured, he would not be able to participate in the sect competition soon. This meant that he would lose the opportunity to become an inner sect disciple. So how could Teng Ming not be resentful? Swish! The sound of something rushing through the air was heard, and a figure was rushing over from afar. Everyone's gazes immediately shifted to the front. That figure was very fast, and he appeared in the middle of the square in a few breaths' time. His black hair was draped over his shoulders, and his figure was thin but tall. His gaze was deep, and he carried a broken sword on his back, which was very eye-catching. The person who came was Su Yi, who hurried over. When he heard that Su Jiahui was severely injured and her cultivation base was going to be crippled, he immediately rushed over. When Su Yi saw everything in the square, his face gradually turned green, and a faint red light flickered in his eyes. "It's him, it's that fella." Among the 40 to 50 outer sect disciples who came with Teng Ming, a few of them had just suffered a huge loss in the morning, so they were still fearful when they saw the young man, and they instantly exclaimed softly. Wang Qi and the other 8 to 9 older youths immediately looked at Su Yi curiously. When they saw such a young outer sect disciple, Wang Qi and the others did not take him to heart, and they revealed faint sneers on their faces. Beside Wang Qi, a few youths had gloating expressions on their faces as they watched the show. On the other hand, when the severely injured outer sect disciples on the 36 Sword Peak saw Su Yi, their solemn expressions revealed some joy, and their eyes were filled with anticipation. "Su Yi, leave quickly. They have many people, and they're inner sect disciples. You can't defeat them." When she saw Su Yi, the expression on Su Jiahui's pale face changed greatly. There were so many inner sect disciples and dozens of outer sect disciples. No matter how strong Su Yi was, how could he be a match for so many people? An inner sect disciple was already very strong. Any inner sect disciple had a cultivation base above the Yuan profound realm. Su Jiahui could not help but worry for Su Yi. Uffed. When her voice fell, the blood in her body surged, and Su Jiahui spat out another mouthful of blood. Su Yi slowly clenched his fists and looked at the severely injured Su Jiahui. The expression on his face became more and more ashen. When Teng Ming saw Su Yi, his heart instinctively trembled. There was an inexplicable fear in his heart, as though he was a mouse that had seen a tiger. Teng Ming's heart palpitated for no reason when he saw the invisible aura, especially when he looked into the eyes, and he wanted to retreat. However, when he thought about how Wang Qi, a few inner sect disciples, and 40 to 50 outer sect disciples were present, how could they not be able to deal with this kid with so many helpers? As he thought about this, he secretly took a deep breath and suppressed the fear in his heart. He sneered and said to Su Yi coldly, "Hee kid, you finally appeared. I've said that I won't let you go. You won't be able to jump around for long." Su Yi stared straight at Teng Ming and clenched his fists so tightly that a cracking sound could be heard from his knuckles. He then looked at Su Jiahui and walked forward step by step. He asked, "Miss Jiahui, how are you?" "I'm fine. Leave quickly. I don't need you to care about me. They won't dare to do anything to us. After all, outer sect disciples are still disciples. They won't dare to take our lives." Su Jiahui was worried and asked Su Yi to leave. Su Jiahui knew that Teng Ming brought Wang Qi and the others here to seek revenge on Su Yi. They would definitely not let Su Yi off easily. In the morning, Su Yi attacked Teng Ming because of him. At the end of the day, this was their problem, and it had nothing to do with Su Yi. "Shut up. You refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. B*TCH, I don't dare to kill you, but I can cripple you." As Teng Ming watched Su Yi walking toward him step by step, an invisible pressure was getting closer. Teng Ming's expression changed, and his heart trembled. When he heard Su Jiahui's words, he became bolder and kicked Su Jiahui hard. Bang! Chapter 350. Chi, a figure like a phantom, immediately helped Su Jiahui up the moment she landed on the ground. His black hair was draped over his shoulders, and his figure was thin, but as tall and straight as a mountain. Su Yi wiped the blood from Su Jiahui's mouth with his sleeve. His face was so pale that it was scary. "Hurry up and leave. They have inner disciples who won't let you go. Hurry up and leave." Su Jiahui looked at Su Yi. Her face was extremely pale as she urged Su Yi to escape. With Su Yi's strength, Su Jiahui hoped that he could avoid it. Wang Qi and the others were inner sect disciples. They definitely wouldn't have any scruples when dealing with an outsider. Fortunately, they did not know that Su Yi was an outsider. Otherwise, the situation would have been worse. "Don't worry. They can't do anything to me." Su Yi's heart twitched, feeling very uncomfortable. Cool 7, Craftsman O Network, Byung 8 Geo, #free SVCNJ little say, this girl was seriously injured, but she was still thinking about him. She was just like Wan Er. In an instant, Su Yi couldn't help but think of Wan. His eyes were a little dazed. A healing pill appeared in Su Yi's hand. Not allowing Su Jiahui to say anything, he stuffed it into his bloodless lips and asked seriously, "Don't be afraid. Tell me, who hurt you like this?" Su Jiahui wanted to say something, but when she looked at Su Yi and the young man in front of her, for some reason, she felt that the young man in front of her was like a tall mountain that she could rely on. Su Jiahui glanced sideways and hesitated for a moment before she looked at Wang Qi and said, "It's him. His name is Wang Qi, and he's an inner court disciple. He's Teng Ming's helper." Wang Qi. Following Su Jiahui's gaze, Su Yi looked at Wang Qi. He had already noticed the young man. Wang Yi was already displeased when he saw Su Jiahui and Su Yi looking at him. He raised his eyebrows impatiently and glared at Su Yi. With a warning tone, he said coldly, "You're right. You're the one who injured Teng Ming. Cripple your own hands, and I can pretend that nothing happened. Cripple your own hands. Who do you think you are?" Su Yi glanced at Wang Qi and his expression darkened. Wang Qi was stunned. He did not expect that an outer court disciple would dare to speak to him like that. This was definitely the first time in his life that he had encountered such a situation. Wang Qi's expression instantly darkened. Coldness filled his eyes as he stared at Su Yi and said coldly, "You're really arrogant. Outer court disciples nowadays are getting out of hand. It's time to teach them a lesson. Since that's the case, I'll start with you guys. Since you value that girl so much, cripple your own hands together. I'd like to see if outer court disciples will still be so arrogant in the future. Do you think you're qualified?" He looked at Wang Qi with a cold glint in his eyes. He said coldly, "I have to say that you've angered me." At that moment, He was indeed furious. Su Jiahui's serious injuries had completely enraged He did not want to cause trouble. After all, they were at Shunjian Gate. However, these people were being overbearing and were unwilling to let it go. Teng Ming's kick to Su Jiahui and Wang Qi's intention to cripple Su Jiahui in himself made Yi understand that even if he took a step back today and settled things peacefully, these people would not let Su Jiahui and the others off in the future. The girl in front of him had only met him by chance, but she had already saved his life. Now that she was seriously injured and could not even protect herself, the first thing she did was to help him escape and protect him. How could Yi stay out of this? If anything happened to the girl in the future, Yi would never forgive himself. Yi knew that if he wanted to put an end to all of this, he could only use absolute intimidation. Only absolute intimidation would be able to make these fellows fear him. Although this was Shunjian Gate, trouble was already in front of him. Someone had threatened to cripple him. He did not want to cause trouble, but he could not tolerate it anymore. After all, this was the 36th Sword Peak. These disciples came to cause trouble. Yi did not believe that there would be no one to reason with if things got out of hand. It was said that Elder Su's temper was not very good. If things got out of hand, he would probably not stay out of it. "Brat, how dare you be so arrogant? You're just an outer disciple. Seeing your brother, Wang Qi, killing you is equivalent to killing a dog. You'll pay the price today." Teng Ming could not bear it any longer. His face was gloomy. This brat still dares to be arrogant in front of Wang Qi. He's simply courting death. "It seems that the price I gave you is too light. It's my fault." "Good, very good." He stared at Teng Ming and spoke word by word. His voice seemed to be coming out from the gaps between his teeth. An inexplicable chill spread out. He glanced around and looked at a 3-foot-long sword that a disciple had dropped not far away. Hearing Su Yi's words and looking at Su Yi's gaze, Teng Ming's hair stood on end. He could not help but shiver in his heart. Boom! Vitality gushed out from under Su Yi's feet. Vitality swept out from the soles of his feet, and the 3-foot-long sword suddenly bounced up from the ground. He stretched out his hand. Vitality fluctuated in his palm and turned into a whirlpool. It was as if there was a suction force that suddenly sucked the 3-foot-long sword into his hand. When they saw this scene, Wang Qi and the other inner disciples' faces changed. This move seemed simple, but they all knew that it required an absolutely precise control of vitality. It also required a sufficiently vigorous vitality. If it were them, they might not succeed. With the long sword in hand, he stared at Teng Ming and stepped forward step by step. What are you trying to do?" Seeing Yi coming toward him, Teng Ming was instinctively shocked and could not help but step back. "You're just an outer disciple. You're too arrogant. You're courting death," Wang Qi said coldly. The corner of his eyes twitched and revealed a chilling gaze. Vitality gushed out from the soles of his feet, and he borrowed the momentum to soar several feet into the air. It was as if he was diving down from mid-air. Boom! At the same time, Wang Qi moved his arm and threw a punch at Su Yi's chest. This punch was like a ferocious tiger pouncing on its prey. It was swift and fierce. The force contained in the punch was so powerful that it caused a humming sound to echo in the air. Bang! However, just as Wang Qi's punch was about to land on Su Yi's chest, a red light burst out and a fist wrapped in blazing vitality blocked the punch. Immediately, a low muffled sound was heard. Crack! When a muffled sound of energy was heard, It was accompanied by the sound of bones breaking. Up, a shrill scream pierced through the tranquil evening sky. Chapter 351. Bang! Wang Chi's body fell to the ground like a kite with a broken string. It was a horrible sight, and he kept screaming in pain. His entire right arm was limp, as if its bones were completely crushed. Wang Chi's fist was also drenched in blood. His bones were crushed, and his flesh and blood were crushed together. The white bones were ghastly, and his skin and flesh were lacerated. It was a frightening sight. Everyone was dumbstruck by the scene, and they could not come back to their senses for a while. An inner sect disciple was severely injured in one move. He was no match for Yangming at all. Su Jiahui and the others were also dumbfounded. Nobody expected this outcome. Tengming was also dumbfounded. He stared at the scene for a long time. Shrill screams and wails made everyone come back to their senses, and their faces changed drastically. That fella is strange. Senior brother, quickly attack him together. Attack him together. Soon enough, Tengming shouted in horror. He asked the others to attack together, but he could not help but take a few steps back. All of you, attack together. Kill that fella for me. Kill. Wang Chi wailed and struggled to get up. The blood in his mouth was frightening, and he yelled coldly. His face was hideous, as if he had gone mad. His entire arm was destroyed and turned into meat paste. It was impossible for him to recover. How was he going to use a sword in the future? That was equivalent to crippling him. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. After Tengming and Wang Chi shouted, the remaining 8 inner sect disciples came back to their senses. They gritted their teeth, and a treasure sword appeared in their hands. The treasure swords were filled with brilliance and pressure. They were extraordinary and were not ordinary items. This fella is strange. Attack him together. A young man shouted and formed a sword gesture in his hand. Buzz, buzz. All of a sudden, the 8 figures quickly surrounded Su Yi in a formation that surrounded and attacked him. The 8 treasure swords glowed, and 8 profound origin stage auras filled the air. When they gathered together, they were rather imposing. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. 8 streaks of sword chi shot out and swept across the sky. Their auras shrouded Su Yi. 8 inner sect disciples attacked at the same time, crushing Su Yi. This caused the expressions of Su Jiahui and the others to turn solemn once more. They couldn't help but feel worried for Su Yi. 8 streaks of sword chi swept over at the same time, enveloping all directions. Su Yi stood in the middle. His shoulder-length black hair danced in the wind, and a chill grew thicker and thicker. These so-called inner sect disciples were really arrogant. The 8 of them attacked at the same time, using their full strength. It was a killing move. He really wasn't afraid of killing an outer sect disciple. He didn't care about the life and death of an outer sect disciple at all. The law of the jungle was nothing more than this. Buzz, infusing Yuan energy into the 3 feet long sword in Su Yi's hand. The long sword in his hand was instantly covered in a dense glow. A swift and fierce aura swept out, bringing with it an icy aura, causing the surrounding temperature to suddenly drop a little. Ice Shadow Sword Art. Ice Shadow Kill. At the same time, a white light swept out from Su Yi's eyes. He raised the long sword in his hand, and in an instant, streaks of sword chi burst out in all directions. Swoosh, swoosh. The sword chi converged and turned into a blooming sword flower above his head. It brought with it an icy aura, bright and fierce. Clang, 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 clang. The streaks of sword chi collided. Suddenly, the sound of metal clashing resounded, and sparks flew in all directions. The densely packed sword chi constantly collided with each other, erupting with a frightening aura and fierce force. Clang, 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 clang. In just a short time, the surrounding treasured swords fell out of their hands and fell into the distance. The sword chi shattered, and 8 figures flew out. In midair, they were already vomiting blood. A mist of blood poured out, and 8 figures fell in all directions. Their hair was disheveled, and their clothes were tattered. Their skin was cut and blood flowed out. In some places, white bones were exposed, and the area between their thumb and forefinger was badly mutilated. The 8 people screamed and wailed. They were seriously injured, and each of them looked like they had been stabbed more than a dozen times. They were seriously injured and could only scream on the verge of death. Dumbfounded, everyone was completely dumbfounded. Su Jiahui and the others were even more indescribably shocked and couldn't help but shiver. The 3-feet-long sword in Su Yi's hand was dripping with blood. His eyes were red, and a cold light pervaded the air. He didn't look at the people lying on the ground screaming, and walked towards Teng Ming with his sword. These so-called inner sect disciples of Shunjian Gate were only at the 3rd or 4th level of the Origin Profound Realm. With Su Yi's current strength, they couldn't withstand a single blow. Although Su Yi had held back a lot, he was also furious at this moment. He wanted to absolutely intimidate them, so he wouldn't be too polite. If he didn't draw blood, he wouldn't be able to truly intimidate them. What are you trying to do? My brother is going to become a direct disciple soon. If you dare to touch me, my brother won't let you off. Teng Ming was trembling in shock. When he saw Su Yi walking towards him, his eyes were filled with horror and fear. His body trembled as he retreated. He then yelled at the 40 to 50 outer sect disciples who were still in shock. What are you waiting for? Quickly attack together and kill that brat. I'll take responsibility if anything happens. Quickly attacked together, the 40 to 50 outer sect disciples looked at each other. They looked at Teng Ming, Wang Qi, and the other inner sect disciples who were lying on the ground screaming, then looked at Su Yi, who was like a god of war. How would they dare to step forward? Instead, they involuntarily retreated. What are you trying to do? My brother won't let you off. Teng Ming was terrified. He looked at Su Yi, who was constantly stepping forward. His body trembled and went limp, and fear spread out from the bottom of his heart. Teng Ming originally thought that with the inner sect disciples standing up for him, that brat was dead for sure. Moreover, there were so many inner sect disciples. Even so, Teng Ming did not expect that the outcome would be the complete opposite of what he expected. This kick is for Miss Jiahui. Su Yi arrived in front of Teng Ming. His eyes were cold as he kicked Teng Ming. Bang! RSU, he was not polite at all. Teng Ming could not avoid his kick. Hence a muffled sound was heard as he kicked Teng Ming's lower abdomen. As a shrill scream was heard, Teng Ming's body was instantly sent flying. When he crashed to the ground, he vomited blood violently. He hugged his lower abdomen and rolled around in pain as he wailed incessantly. I didn't pay enough for you the last time, but I won't this time. Su Yi arrived in front of Teng Ming, who was screaming and rolling on the ground. Subsequently, he slashed with his 1-meter-long sword. Swish, a sword light flashed. As Teng Ming widened his eyes, his right arm, which was wrapped in a bandage, was severed from his shoulder, and blood spurted out. Teng Ming let out a heart-wrenching scream. Under the immense pain, his vision turned black, and he fainted right away. Everyone's eyes trembled. That young man is really ruthless. What else does he want to do? Chapter 352. When the inner sect disciples, who were lying on the ground and struggling, saw Su Yi approaching them, a strong, uneasy premonition filled their hearts. They struggled to get up, but their bleeding bodies did not listen to them. At this moment, the inner sect disciples wanted to tear Teng Ming into pieces. What outer sect disciple? Is he really an outer sect disciple? Given his strength, even the most fearsome direct disciples in the sect are not as strong as him. Get lost. If you dare to step onto the 36 sword peak again, you'll have to bear the consequences. Su Yi's stern voice caused the temperature in the air to drop abruptly. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Yi did not hold back and kicked out. An inner disciple's body flew out like a bird with broken wings and directly rolled down the mountain. Bang, bang, bang. Several muffled sounds were heard in succession. Su Yi kicked a few times, and the inner sect disciples were sent flying backward one after another. Their bodies drew a parabola in the air as they were kicked down the mountain one by one. The sound of people rolling down the mountain was incessant, and blood dyed the stone path down the mountain red. Only then did Zhang Qing rush over. He had just arrived and didn't know what was going on. He could only look from afar and see people being kicked down the mountain like stones. His eyes were filled with astonishment, and his legs were trembling as he stood rooted to the ground. "You're not qualified to cripple me. If you dare to provoke me again, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life," Su Yi said coldly in front of Wang Qi, his foot enlarged in the latter's horrified eyes. Bang! The pitiful Wang Qi seemed to have been shocked to the point of being in a daze. His body was also kicked down the mountain. The entire place fell silent. Everyone's gazes froze, and their faces were filled with shock. Gulp! After a few breaths, the sound of people gasping was heard. "Run, run!" The outer sect disciples returned to their senses. They were horrified, and they immediately fled. Since the inner sect disciples were kicked down the mountain, how would they dare to stay? "Take him away!" Su Yi bellowed. His voice was infused with Yuan Qi, and it was deafening. The outer sanctum disciples trembled. A few youths gritted their teeth and walked forward while trembling in fear. They carried the unconscious Teng Ming down the mountain in a hurry. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the other outer disciples were still in a daze as they watched everything unfold before their eyes. Su Yi casually inserted the long sword into the crack in the ground. Then he retracted his aura and arrived beside Su Jiahui. "Su Yi, you're in big trouble. Those are inner sanctum disciples." There was no joy on Su Jiahui's pale face. Instead, it was full of worry. She pondered about something with a serious expression. She kept muttering, "I don't know when Elder Su will come back. Without the token, he definitely won't be able to leave the mountain gate. What should I do? Don't worry, it'll be fine. We'll deal with whatever comes our way." Su Yi smiled faintly to reassure Su Jiahui. Then he said to everyone, "Everyone, go and recuperate." "Brother Su Yi, thank you." Someone mustered the courage to thank Su Yi. At least, Su Yi had helped them vent their anger today. "Perhaps you'll have trouble in the future. You must be prepared." Su Yi was apologetic. He had dealt a heavy blow to Wang Qi, Teng Ming, and the others today. However, it was obviously impossible to prevent those disciples from finding trouble with him in the future. Perhaps those inner sanctum disciples could not do anything to him and might vent their anger on the outer sanctum disciples. Su Yi could not help but be worried. They've gone too far. We'll look for the deacons. After all, they can't be lawless in the mountain gate, a young man said. "Go and recuperate," Su Yi said. It was already nighttime. Everyone's injuries were very serious, and they needed to recuperate as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be disadvantageous to them. "Brother Su Yi, you must be careful. Those inner sanctum disciples will definitely not let this go." Zhang Qing came back to her senses and walked forward. She looked at Su Yi with shock in her eyes for a long time. "Let me think about it. I'll definitely think of a way." Su Jiahui was very worried. Su Yi had dealt a heavy blow to Teng Ming and the others because of her. She was just an outsider. How could she let anything happen to him? Su Yi smiled and left. When he returned to his room, Su Yi's brows furrowed slightly. It was impossible for Su Yi to say that he was not worried. This was the Xinjiang Gate. He had severely injured a disciple of the Xinjiang Gate, and he was an inner sanctum disciple. There would definitely be trouble. Even if he met a reasonable person in the Xinjiang Gate, he would not be able to escape punishment. After all, he was just an outsider. He did not know when Elder Su, who was on the 36th Sword Peak, would return. The best strategy is to leave. Su Yi's eyes moved. He wanted to leave quietly. At that time, even if there was trouble, he would not be found. In any case, this was the Xinjiang Gate. It had nothing to do with him in the future. As for Elder Su's life-saving favor, he could only repay him in the future. After packing up, Su Yi pushed open the door and left quietly under the moonlight. The bright moon hung in the sky. Tonight, the moon was bright and the stars were dim. Su Yi did not know where the Xinjiang Gate was. He thought that all roads led to Rome. Since he was leaving secretly, it did not matter where he went. As long as he left the Xinjiang Gate, it would be fine. In the quiet mountain range, there were occasional roars of beasts from afar. Sui did not dare to walk on the main road, nor did he dare to use his yuan qi. He shuttled through the small paths. He wanted to cross the mountains and leave the Shunjian Gate. On the mountain peak on the rocks, a beautiful woman with an exquisite figure stood there silently. She wore a plain-colored long dress with a light-colored belt that tightened around her slender waist, causing her figure to be even more graceful, elegant, yet luxurious. Her jet-black, beautiful hair was coiled into a flowing cloud bun with an emerald jade hairpin in it. After passing through a mountain peak, Sui drilled out from a crack in the stone. The moonlight shrouded him. His eyes lit up. Not far away, he saw such a beautiful woman. Someone. Sui was surprised. There was a woman in the Shunjian Gate in the middle of the night. She was definitely not an ordinary woman. He immediately held his breath, tiptoed, and prepared to go back. He planned to change his way back. After withdrawing from the crack in the stone, Sui felt that the woman behind him did not seem to move. She did not notice him. Sui secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He went back the way he came and planned to change his way. Suddenly, Sui's eyes trembled. Not far away, the woman's figure appeared in front of him again. The woman stood quietly. Under the cover of the moonlight, she was quiet and beautiful. Looking carefully at the woman, Sui's heart trembled. He could not feel any aura. The more it was like this, the more frightened Sui was. During this period of time, Sui was no longer the same as before. The woman in front of him was definitely not simple. She was definitely a strong person. Chapter 353. Sui looked at the woman who was standing there quietly, as if she didn't notice him at all. After a while, he took a deep breath and didn't try to avoid her anymore. "Senior, if you want to kill me or torture me, please do as you please. The strong are respected. I'm not strong enough, so I admit defeat," Sui said and walked forward. The other party was obviously here for him, so why should he leave? There was no chance for him to leave at all. She was a strong cultivator. Hearing Sui's words, the woman slowly turned around. Her deep and dark eyes were even brighter in the moonlight as she looked at Sui. Sui finally saw the woman in front of him clearly. Her face was like a hibiscus, her eyebrows were like curved willows, and her actions were like a serene blue. So beautiful. Sui was secretly amazed. Such a beautiful woman. When she was young, she must have been an absolute beauty that could make all living things fall for her. "Why should I kill you?" The beautiful woman looked at Sui with a calm expression, as if there was no expression on her face. It made people feel fearful for no reason. "I injured the inner disciples of a Shunjian Gate. Senior, you're here to stand up for them, right?" Sui raised his eyebrows. He had only been in the Shunjian Gate for a few days and had only interacted with Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Teng Ming, and a few others. Since this beautiful woman came for him, she was naturally here for Teng Ming and Wang Qi. She should be an elder of Teng Ming and Wang Qi. Why should I stand up for them? The beautiful woman was still expressionless as she looked at Sui. Her tone was calm. "Senior, you're not here for them?" Sui was a little surprised as his eyes moved. "What's your name? Whose disciple are you?" The beautiful woman looked at Sui and sized him up. "Aren't you here to stand up for them?" Sui's eyes flickered as a glint flashed across his eyes. Without leaving any traces, he bowed to the woman and said in a serious tone, "I am Sui, a disciple recently accepted by Elder Sui of the 36th Sword Peak." Hearing this, the beautiful woman's eyes moved slightly. She looked at Sui and asked, "Then what are you doing here at night?" "I'm looking for a secluded place to practice my martial arts," Sui said seriously. It was said that not many people in the Divine Sword sect dared to offend Elder Sui. If he said that he was Elder Sui's disciple, he might be able to pass the test. Isn't the 36th Sword Peak quiet enough? The beautiful woman looked at Sui and asked, "This?" Sui was surprised, but his expression did not change. He said, "I'm afraid that I'll disturb my master's rest, so I came here." "So Elder Sui is back. That's great. Take me to your master. I have something to discuss with Elder Su. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi and said. Su Yi was a little dumbfounded. This beautiful woman was an expert of a Xinjiang gate. If she was really looking for Elder Su, why would she need him to lead the way? Senior, you know that Elder Su is not in the Xinjiang gate. Why do you make things difficult for me? Su Yi understood that the beautiful woman did not believe him at all. Brat, when did I make things difficult for you? You're so young, yet you don't speak the truth. Are you called Yi Su or Su Yi? Why would Elder Su accept a disciple? I'm afraid he's not your master. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi with a sharp look in her eyes. The beautiful woman in front of him did not have any aura fluctuations, but Su Yi felt an invisible pressure pressing down on him. It was as if he could not breathe. The beautiful woman's cultivation was unfathomable. She was definitely a terrifying expert. She seemed to know everything. Otherwise, how would she know that he was called Su Yi? My name is Su Yi. I was seriously injured a few days ago. It was Elder Su who saved me and brought me to the Xinjiang gate. There was nothing to hide. Su Yi told the truth. If the beautiful woman did not come for Teng Ming, she would not make things difficult for him. Where did you learn from? The beautiful woman continued to ask. I don't belong to any sect. I was training outside. I encountered an accident and was seriously injured. I was saved by Elder Su. Su Yi replied. Other than the Tian Yao school, he did not belong to any sect. As for the Tian Yao school, it was not exposed enough. Hearing Su Yi's words, the beautiful woman's expression changed. So, you seriously injured a few inner disciples. You're afraid of getting into trouble, so you plan to leave tonight. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi and continued to speak. Su Yi raised his eyebrows and said, This is the Xinjiang gate. Look at those disciples. They are arrogant and bully others. If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. I am an outsider at the Xinjiang gate, and Elder Su is not in the sect. As the saying goes, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. A wise man submits to circumstances. Of the 36 stratagems, leaving is the best stratagem. What do you mean by if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked? You are dissatisfied with the Xinjiang gate. The beautiful woman interrupted Su Yi's words. No, Senior, that's not what I meant. The upper beam definitely does not include you. Su Yi smiled embarrassedly. The beautiful woman in front of him seemed to have a certain position in the Xinjiang gate. Perhaps she was also an elder. When the beautiful woman heard this, her expression changed slightly, as if she wanted to laugh, but she did not show it on her face. The fierce expression on her face softened quite a bit. She looked at Su Yi and said, The weak are prey to the strong, the survival of the fittest. Although it is cruel, it is the survival of the fittest, and this has never changed. If the sect is harmonious, and the brothers are kind and humble, how can such a disciple become strong? How can such a divine sword sect stand tall in the central region and not fall? Su Yi was touched. The beautiful woman's words were not without reason. If the sect was harmonious, there would be no competition. A fierce tiger could not come out of sheep pen. Only in evil water could a flood dragon appear. The survival of the fittest was the survival of the fittest. You have seriously injured so many inner core disciples. If you leave, those outer core disciples on the 36 Sword Peak will suffer. They can't find you, and they don't know where you come from. Elder Su is not here. At that time, those outer core disciples are very likely to be regarded as spies and traitors of the Xinjiang gate. At least their cultivation will be abolished, and they will be expelled from the Xinjiang gate. At most, they will be sentenced to death. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi and said. Hearing this, Su Yi's eyes trembled. He did not think of this. If he disappeared quietly, the Xinjiang gate had nothing to do with him. However, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and others would be in big trouble. If other disciples had nothing to do with him, Su Yi would not care so much. However, Su Jiahui had saved his life. In fact, Wang Qi and others came to make trouble because of him. In fact, the trouble was caused by him. This made Su Yi uneasy. Thank you, Senior. Su Yi saluted and went back to the 36th sword peak. Are you going back? The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi, and a light flashed in her eyes. Su Yi turned back and said, I'm going back. Chapter 354. I don't believe that Xinjiang Gate is unreasonable. Su Yi said, counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. The divine sword sect shouldn't be so unreasonable. You're just an outsider. Xinjiang Gate will naturally side with its disciples. The beautiful woman said calmly. This? Su Yi was slightly stunned and speechless. How about this? Since you're talented, if you're willing to become my disciple, I can protect you. I'll also guide you well. It won't be difficult for you to become a powerful expert in the future. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi and said in a serious tone, Master. Su Yi's expression was calm as he asked the beautiful woman, can Senior protect the outer sect disciples on the 36th sword peak? They're just outer disciples. What does it have to do with me? You're talented. If you become my disciple, I'll protect you. It won't be difficult for you to shine in Xinjiang Gate one day and become a giant. The beautiful woman said to Su, Thank you for your kindness. I'll take my leave. Although Su Yi was tempted to become an expert, he wasn't interested in becoming a disciple. Besides, Su Jiahui and the others were still in trouble. He shook his head. Do you really want to go back for those outer disciples? Even if you'll get into big trouble? The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi with a dark light flickering in her eyes. I'm the one who caused this trouble. Of course, I'll go back. At worst, I'll fight. Su Yi nodded and turned to leave. Wait. Looking at Su Yi's back, the beautiful woman's eyes moved slightly. Suddenly, she called out to Su Yi and said, I have an idea. I just don't know if you dare to do it. Please tell me. Hearing this, Su Yi suddenly stopped and turned around. He was interested. It's simple. You just have to admit that you're Elder Su's disciple. By then, even if someone wants to make things difficult for you, they will have scruples and won't dare to do anything to you. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi and said, But I'm not Elder Su's disciple. Su Yi said, Then why did you say that you're Elder Su's disciple in front of me? The beautiful woman asked Su. This, Su Yi was speechless. Saying that he was Elder Su's disciple was just a way to get away with it. Anyway, Elder Su isn't in Xinjiang Gate for the time being. You're someone he brought back. If someone really wants to trouble you, you just have to insist that you're Elder Su's disciple. No one will dare to do anything to you. The beautiful woman looked at Su Yi. It seemed that every word and action of hers was leading Su Yi. She said, As long as you admit that you're Elder Su's disciple, no one in Xinjiang Gate will dare to do anything to you. This way, you can protect those outer sect disciples until Elder Su returns. I'm pretending to be Elder Su's disciple. If Elder Su blames me, Su Yi frowned. Elder Su had saved him. If he still pretended to be Elder Su's disciple, it seemed a bit inappropriate. Elder Su's temper is not very good. Maybe after knowing that you're pretending to be his disciple, he'll kill you directly. The beautiful woman stared at Su Yi and said, However, didn't you just say that your life was saved by Elder Su? At worst, you can give her life back to him. Su Yi's eyes moved. He seemed to be thinking about something. You decide for yourself. The beautiful woman continued. It seemed that she was going to leave. Senior, wait. Su Yi stopped the beautiful woman. He looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and squeezed out an embarrassed smile. His smile was very bright. It seemed that he had something to say. If you have something to say, then say it. The beautiful woman asked. Her eyes moved slightly. Su Yi smiled and immediately said enthusiastically, Senior, you must have an extraordinary position in Xinjiang Gate. I'm really grateful that you're willing to help me. Senior's face is righteous and amiable. Your temperament is outstanding. You're like an immortal, like a fairy descending to earth. You're the fairy of the ninth heaven. Your beauty is peerless. Well, let's get down to business. The beautiful woman interrupted Su Yi's words, but on her calm face, there seemed to be a slight ripple in her heart. Senior, you're willing to help me. As the saying goes, if you want to help someone, you should help them to the end. Do you have any medallions that could be useful in times of danger? If you could give me one, I'd be very grateful. Su Yi's eyes flickered. Hearing this, the beautiful woman's eyes secretly twitched. She stared at Su Yi's extremely bright smile for a while before saying, "As long as you insist that you're Elder Su's disciple, it's enough to be your protective amulet. Even the head of Shunjian Gate won't dare to do anything to you before confirming your identity." Elder Su has such a high status. Hearing the beautiful woman's words, Su Yi couldn't help but be a little surprised. If Elder Su had such a high status, then why did the outer disciples of the 36 Sword Peaks behave so atrociously? The dozen or so outer disciples of the 36 Sword Peaks didn't have any status. You'll know when the time comes. However, if you rely on your fake identity to do whatever you want in Shunjian Gate, I'm afraid that Elder Su will really destroy you when the time comes. As soon as the beautiful woman finished speaking, her figure disappeared like a ghost. Senior, Su Yi opened his mouth. Before he finished speaking, the beautiful woman had already disappeared. What a terrifying expert. Su Yi was shocked. He couldn't help but compare this beautiful woman with the experts he had seen before. For example, the City Lord of Kanglan City, Merciless West, and so on. He didn't know who was stronger. Since I'm here, I'll take it easy. Under the bright moon, Su Yi was in a daze for a while. A red light flashed in his eyes, and he returned to the 36th Sword Peak. In the distance, the towering peak was surrounded by clouds and mist. The beautiful woman was shrouded in clouds and mist. She looked at the young man's figure in the distance at the foot of the mountain, and a slight smile appeared on her face. She smiled faintly and muttered to herself, "What a strange fella. He's quite interesting, but I don't know if he's to that fella's liking." The night was quiet and dark. However, for some places in Xinjiang Gate, it was not a peaceful night. The 15th Sword Peak was brightly lit. In the hall, many seriously injured young men were lying on stretchers on the ground. They were Teng Ming, Wang Qi, and the others. A few outer sect disciples stood at the side in fear. At this moment, Wang Qi, Teng Ming, and the others were lying on the stretchers and had regained consciousness. At the head of the hall, many older young men looked at Teng Ming, Wang Qi, and the others, who were heavily injured on the ground. They were rather shocked and did not look too good. This was done by an outer sect disciple on the 36th Sword Peak. Are you sure he did it alone? Chapter 355. Senior Brother Hua. It was done by that brat alone. He's too strong, too strange. He's so vicious, we can't let him go. Otherwise, our 15th Sword Peak will lose face. Wang Qi was in a terrible state. One of his arms was crippled, and his eyes were filled with resentment. However, Wang Qi's heart trembled at the thought of that young man. That brat was too ruthless. His actions were incomparably swift and fierce. His future in this life could be considered to have been completely destroyed. That's the 36th Sword Peak. How dare you? Don't you know what kind of place the 36th Sword Peak is? Now you know that the 15th Sword Peak has lost face. Hua Dongxio's cold face darkened as he glanced coldly at Wang Qi and the other inner disciples. His gaze was so sharp that Wang Qi and the other inner disciples did not dare to look him in the eye. Senior Brother Hua, that kid is just an outer disciple. He doesn't care about our 15th Sword Peak because he's on the 36th Sword Peak. We wanted to go to Teng Ming to seek justice, but we didn't expect that kid to be so vicious. Wang Qi gritted his teeth and looked at the cold young man. Senior Brother Hua, we're not strong enough. However, we can't lose the reputation of the 15th Sword Peak. Do you think I don't know what you're doing? Hearing this, the cold-looking young man stared at Wang Qi, and then his face turned even gloomier. He said coldly, "But an outer disciple is indeed a little too arrogant. If we don't do anything, I'm afraid that people will think that our 15th Sword Peak is easy to bully." The cold young man paused for a moment, and his eyes fell on a young man in red beside him. He said, "Junior Brother Ba Yi, Master won't be around for a few days. Tomorrow, I'll have to trouble you to go to the 36th Sword Peak. The 15th Sword Peak cannot lose face." "Yes, Senior Brother Hua." The young man in red nodded calmly and glanced at Wang Qi and the other inner disciples on the ground. Did you hear? Wang Qi suffered a great loss on the 15th sword peak. His right arm was crippled. I heard about it too. I heard that it was an outer disciple on the 36th sword peak who injured him. Outer disciple? Who's so powerful that he could injure Wang Qi? It said that Wang Yu wasn't the only one. Many inner disciples on the 15th sword peak were severely injured and kicked down from the 36th sword peak. Is it really an outer sect disciple who did this? His strength is not ordinary. I've never heard of an inner disciple on the 36th sword peak. I'm afraid the 15th sword peak won't let this go. The 15th sword peak has lost a lot of face this time. Naturally, they won't let it go. There will be a good show tomorrow. In Shenzhen Gate, the news spread quietly and caused an uproar. In the early morning of the next day, the first ray of sunlight penetrated through the faint fresh mist and sprinkled on this ancient heaven and earth. A gorgeous morning glow appeared in the east, and the mountain range was filled with a veil-like mist. Let's go. Early in the morning, many people stepped out of the 15th sword peak with swords in their hands. Their auras were surging with sharpness as they leaped onto a few flying barbaric beasts. It's the people from the 15th sword peak. They really went to the 36th sword peak. This aura doesn't seem to be friendly. There will be a great battle. Quick, something interesting is about to happen. In Shenzhen Gate, some disciples raised their heads with excitement in their eyes. Phew! Early in the morning, on a huge rock at the entrance of the 36th sword peak, he stopped his breathing and breathed out a mouthful of turbid qi. He opened his eyes, and a dazzling light flickered in his eyes. A wave of aura shook the surroundings and then was restrained. Immediately after, he felt the abundant yuan qi in his dantian. Suyi's eyes were filled with satisfaction. The injuries on his body, which were already mostly healed, were no longer a hindrance. He was full of energy and yuan qi. Su-yi returned to the 36th sword peak and waited for Elder Su to come back to thank him personally. As for those troubles, he would deal with them as they came. However, Su-yi did not return to the mountain. Instead, he simply adjusted his qi under the 36th sword peak. Su-yi reckoned that if Teng Ming and the others did not let it go, they would naturally continue to climb the mountain the next day. Moreover, Su Jiahui and the other disciples were recuperating and could not be of much help. Therefore, Su-yi chose to wait at the entrance of the 36th sword peak. Even if there were troubles, Su Jiahui and the others would not be blamed. Looking into the distance, a rising sun slowly emerged from behind the mountain peak. The first few rays of light converged with the dawn that was about to disappear. In the sky, wisps of gauze gradually disappeared. His field of vision began to widen. It was vigorous and majestic, magnificent and magnificent. So beautiful, Su-yi said softly. He could not help but stretch his body and feel comfortable. Suddenly, Su-yi's eyes trembled slightly. He immediately looked into the distance and saw a flying barbaric demon beast flapping its wings and flying towards him. It's really early, Su-yi muttered softly and frowned slightly. A faint red light flashed in his eyes. Screech, the screech of several flying barbaric demon beasts reverberated in the ancient heaven and earth in the early morning. There were more than 20 youths and young men riding on the gigantic flying barbaric demon beasts. Looking from afar, their auras were quite extraordinary. When they gathered together, they could not be underestimated. It's Ba-yi from the 15th sword peak. Someone from the 15th sword peak really came. He came personally. I heard that he's about to step into the origin spirit realm. Among his peers on the 15th sword peak, Ba-yi's ranking is enough to rank in the top 20. A disciple nearby recognized Ba-yi and was very surprised. He did not expect Ba-yi to come. /8J head. Su-yi raised his eyes and looked at the sky. He came quietly with a broken sword on his back. His outer disciple robe of Shenzhen Gate fluttered slightly. Senior brother Ba-yi, it's him. On the back of one of the flying savage beasts was the outer court disciple who came yesterday. When he saw the young man standing upright with a broken sword on his back, his gaze could not help but tremble. There was still a lingering fear in his heart. Is it him? What is that kid doing here? Is he trying to escape? Instantly, many pairs of eyes on the back of the flying barbaric beast looked down from above and stared at Sue-Yi as they sized him up. Many eyes were filled with astonishment. Could such a young man really be as powerful as Wang Qi and the others had said? How could there be such a powerful existence among the outer sect disciples? Hula, several flying barbaric demon beasts spread their wings and landed at a low altitude. They stared at Sue-Yi fiercely with their sharp eyes. Chapter 356. Here comes another one. Sue-Yi raised his eyes slightly and glanced at the figures on the back of the flying savage beasts. He did not pay much attention to them. There were only a few mysterious demon realm savage beasts, and none of the disciples were at the origin spirit realm. Although they were inner disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, they were probably just ordinary. Is that the young man who seriously injured Wang Qi and the others yesterday? Looks like it's him. He doesn't look old. Does he really have the strength to injure Wang Qi and the others? Although Wang Qi and the others are inner disciples of the 15th Sword Peak, they are far from being comparable to Ba Yi. I heard that Ba Yi is not far from the origin spirit realm. That young man is going to be in trouble this time. There were some onlookers gathered in front of the 36th Sword Peak. Most of them were outer disciples of the Xinjiang Gate who had rushed over to watch the show. Say no more. Young man, you have to pay the price for injuring the people of the 15th Sword Peak. Behind Ba Yi, a young man of about 18 or 19 years old spoke to Sue. He had a strong aura, sharp eyes, an indifferent expression. Just cripple him as a warning to others. A young man sneered and stood on the flying savage beast. He looked at Sue-Yi with disdain. Young man, I'll give you a chance to cripple yourself. If you let us do it, it won't be so bad. Ba Yi also looked at Sue-Yi indifferently, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. Ba Yi found it hard to believe that such a young man was indeed special. But did he really have the strength to injure Wang Qi as he had claimed? It was likely that Wang Qi had suffered a great loss and was exaggerating for the sake of his reputation. Who do you think you are? You think you are? Sue-Yi squinted his eyes slightly and glanced at the few flying barbaric demon beasts in the sky. Get down here. All of a sudden, Sue-Yi shouted in a deep voice. His aura suddenly shook and his robe fluttered in the wind. A majestic aura surged out of his body, and a red light surged in his eyes as he stared at the flying savage beasts. The flying beasts were only at the demon profound realm. How could they withstand the aura of Sue-Yi's origin supreme technique? With Sue-Yi's current cultivation level, even a demon true realm brute demon beast would not be able to withstand the energy of the origin supreme technique. GG. Instantly, several flying barbaric beasts screeched. Their ferocious eyes were filled with terror. Their huge bodies trembled as they fell to the ground. Bang, bang. The inner disciples of the 15th Sword Peak who were on the back of the flying barbaric beasts swayed and fell down. Some people fell heavily to the ground, while others staggered and fell to the ground. Ba Yi's face turned pale with fright. He staggered and fell from the back of the flying barbaric beast. His yuan qi surged from the soles of his feet, and he landed on the ground in a sorry state. Sue-Yi's gaze was sharp as he looked at the falling figures around him. His eyes were filled with coldness. I've said before, if you dare to provoke me again, you'll have to bear the consequences. Suddenly, Sue-Yi made a move. Light flickered under his feet, and yuan qi surged. His figure appeared in front of Ba Yi like a ghost. Bang! A screeching sound and the sound of something crashing to the ground were heard almost at the same time. Everyone's vision blurred. Then, they saw Ba Yi flying backward and smashing into a huge rock. The sword in his hand fell to the ground before he could even unsheath it. At this moment, blood was dripping from Ba Yi's shoulder. His hair was disheveled, and he was lying on the ground, unable to get up. Ba Yi screamed. His eyes were filled with horror as he stared at the young man standing in front of him. It was as if he had seen a ghost. Before he could react, he had been severely injured. His internal organs were almost destroyed. He was a pro-disciple of the 15th Sword Peak. He was quite famous among his peers in the Shinjin Gate. But he thought it was a waste of talent to come to the 36th Sword Peak to deal with this young man. He thought that Wang Qi and the others must have been exaggerating. But now, Ba Yi realized that Wang Qi and the others were not exaggerating. The young man in front of him was too terrifying. The fallen youths were also shocked. Their senior brother Ba Yi could not withstand a single blow and was severely injured. "Quick, let's attack together." Several youths recovered from the shock and shouted loudly. They unsheathed their swords, and their auras surged with all their strength. Bang, bang, bang. Ah! A series of muffled sounds and miserable cries seemed to have gathered together. Numerous figures were sent flying like flying stones, their bodies forming a parabola as they were sent flying and heavily smashed onto the ground. Puff! Blood spurted out of their mouths. The swords in their hands fell to the ground, and they could no longer get up. The 20 or so youths were all sent flying before they could react or defend themselves under the shocked and trembling gazes of their peers. In just a few breaths, more than 20 youths were all blown away and severely injured. None of them could get up. They were all covered in blood. It was a horrible sight to see. He stood quietly. Light was fluctuating on his body. His eyes were cold, and it added a bit of fierceness to his temperament. This sword is not bad. Suyi's eyes fell on the swords on the ground. Several of them were shining and emitting a fierce aura. They were all above the level of Yuan weapon. They were probably at the level of dark weapon. The coldness in his eyes disappeared. He rolled his eyes, and a smile appeared on his face. He seemed to have made a decision and an idea. "What do you want to do? I won't let you go. How dare you, outer disciple? I'll tear you into pieces if you dare. No, what do you want to do?" Then, heart-wrenching voices came from the foot of the 36th Sword Peak. More and more onlookers gathered around. They were all dumbfounded. Looking at what was happening in front of them, all the onlookers were dumbfounded. They were so shocked that they could not be more shocked. Soon, more than 20 youths were tied together around a few towering trees at the foot of the 36th Sword Peak. Their faces were stuck to the trees, and their buttocks were naked. At this moment, these 20-odd youths were not even wearing their underwear. However, there was a leaf hanging between each of their legs, covering the last bit of space. If they moved a little, the leaf would fall off. Their interspatial bags and treasure swords were all taken by Yi without any hesitation. "I'm so shy. He's acting like a hooligan. I accidentally saw it just now. Will I have a needle eye?" Some of the female disciples were blushing and screaming. They immediately covered their eyes, but they could not help but sneak a few more glances between their fingers. Chapter 357. So many outer disciples had witnessed it with their own eyes. How could they face others in the sect in the future? After doing all this, he put away his gains, clapped his hands, and looked at the 20 or so disciples of the 15th Sword Peak tied to the tree with satisfaction. "We will never let you go." Ba Yi roared. Bang! But soon, Ba Yi's naked buttocks were kicked hard, leaving a red shoe print and blood coming out of his mouth. "What are you talking about?" He was not polite. Anyway, he had decided to stay, so there was no need to be polite. He hoped that the mysterious, beautiful woman was telling the truth, and that the identity of Elder Su's disciple would be enough to protect him. Finally, some people came down from the 36th Sword Peak. Such a movement alarmed the disciples who were healing on the mountain. Several less injured disciples came down uneasily, led by Zhang Qing. When Zhang Qing and the others saw the scene in front of them, they were dumbfounded and couldn't come back to their senses. There were more than 20 people with naked buttocks tied to the tree. "Isn't that senior brother Ba Yi?" When Zhang Qing saw Ba Yi and others, his eyes twitched fiercely. This was senior brother Ba Yi. Among his peers in the entire Divine Sword sect, he was also a famous expert. He was also an inner disciple of the 15th Sword Peak. At this moment, he was actually stripped naked and tied up at the foot of the mountain. If this spread out, The whole Shunjian gate would be shocked. Brother Su, did you do this? Zhang Qing looked around in shock, and his body couldn't help but tremble. He went up to Su and asked. Looking at the situation, it seemed that Su was the only one who had done this. You came at the right time. I have something to ask you. Show me around. Su smiled and said to Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing looked around and was taken aback. This guy is really bold. He tied up so many inner sect disciples and stripped them naked, but he acted as if nothing had happened and even had the mood to go out for a stroll. It's okay. Su followed Zhang Qing's gaze and glanced around. He could see Zhang Qing's worry. Then, Su Yi's gaze fell on the disciples who had come to watch from afar. His voice was mixed with primordial qi as he said, if anyone from the 15 Sword Peak comes later, please pass on a message for me. I will walk around the sect. If anyone is not convinced, they can come and find me. Zhang Qing was stunned. What was this guy trying to do? He was an outsider, and he was wearing the uniform of an outer sect disciple. In fact, he wasn't even an outer sect disciple. How could he be so arrogant? Thinking about the consequences, Zhang Qing couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. She didn't dare to imagine it. Come, let's ride on these barbaric beasts. Su smiled at Zhang Qing and brought her onto the trembling, flying barbaric beasts on the ground. Look at the KDWI version of QD Chapter 7G on /D. The flying barbaric beasts' eyes trembled with fear for no reason. They obediently got up and flew away. Everyone was dumbstruck and flabbergasted. This young man was too bold and arrogant. He didn't seem to care about Ba, and the others at all. That's too scary. I'm afraid he has also reached the origin spirit stage. After a long time, a disciple in the crowd whispered in shock. Ba, and the other 20-plus inner sect disciples couldn't even withstand a single blow from such a young man. It was very likely that the young man had already broken through to the origin spirit stage. Origin spirit stage. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but exclaim in shock. They weren't shocked because of the origin spirit stage, but because that young man was at most 15 or 16 years old. If he had really reached the origin spirit stage, what kind of talent would that be? With such talent, would he still be an outer sect disciple? Then, many sighs came from the crowd. Some disciples were secretly delighted. These inner sect disciples usually didn't put them in their eyes. Many outer sect disciples have been bullied by inner sect disciples if they didn't have strong connections in the sect. Now that they saw inner sect disciples being trampled by outer sect disciples, many of them were secretly delighted. However, they didn't dare to show it too much. At the foot of the mountain, after Sui left, there was a short period of strange silence. Ba, and the other 20-plus youths were dumbfounded and despaired. Their minds were blank. This was almost the same as directly crippling them. How would they have the face to see others in the sect in the future? At this moment, no one knew the regret in these youths' hearts. If they could turn back time, they probably wouldn't have come to the 36 Sword Peak, even if they were beaten to death. They came aggressively and mightily. Who would have thought that in less than a moment, the curtains would fall in such a way? It wouldn't be long before they became the laughing stock of the entire Shunjian Gate. Indeed, this kind of news spread very quickly, like the wind, instantly spreading in all directions. Something big happened. Ba, and a dozen other youths on the 15 Sword Peak were stripped naked by an inner sect disciple on the 36 Sword Peak. They were tied to a tree and displayed to the public. What? So many inner sect disciples were no match for an outer sect disciple? Let's go and have a look. The news spread like a storm, shocking everyone in the area. What's more, the news spread to the end that there was an outer sect disciple on the 36 Sword Peak who was gay. He stripped Ba, and other inner sect disciples naked and wanted to do something bad to them. The 36th Sword Peak, which had always been quiet, was particularly lively today. Many disciples of the Shunjian Gate came one after another. Many inner disciples were alarmed as well. Many flying, barbaric, demonic beasts appeared in the sky. But the same thing was that when everyone saw the scene at the 36th Sword Peak, they were all dumbfounded and their eyes twitched. More than 20 youths were tied to a tree and displayed to the public. Almost all of them were inner sect disciples. How shocking it was. It seemed that such a thing had never happened in the Shunjian Gate. After hearing the news, many people came to look for curiosity. Ba Yi and a few others were slightly famous. The scene of them being naked was hard to come by. Looking at the increasing number of onlookers, Ba Yi and the other inner sect disciples were all ashen-faced. They wished they could find a hole to hide in. But even if they regained some strength, they did not dare to move. The leaf between their legs was unstable. If they moved even a little, it would fall off. This guy is too strong. Is he really just an outer sect disciple? Maybe he's in the origin spirit realm. It's said that he's not old. If he's already in the origin spirit realm, is there going to be another monster in the Xinjiang Gate? Among the flying savage beasts at low altitude, some inner sect disciples were discussing. To be able to put Ba Yi and the others in such a state, he was most likely in the origin spirit realm. A 15-year-old origin spirit realm cultivator. With such talent, he was definitely a monster. I don't know if that guy is a monster, but he's definitely evil. That's too vicious. Ba Yi will never forget this for the rest of his life. Chapter 358. I heard that the boy is called Su Yi, an outer disciple of the 36th Sword Peak. A young man said. He had heard a lot of news. How can an outer disciple have such talent and strength? It's impossible. Some people doubted that the person who could defeat Ba Yi was an outer disciple, not to mention the person who easily defeated Ba Yi and so many others. This is Elder Su's territory. Is that guy not an outer disciple, but an Elder Su's disciple? Some people murmured, impossible. How can Elder Su accept a disciple? Even if Elder Su accepted a disciple, such a big thing, how can no one know? A young man shook his head. It was impossible. If Elder Su really accepted a disciple, it would be enough to shake the whole Shunjian Gate, and no one would know. Under the lively 36 Sword Peak, there was a lot of discussion which attracted more and more disciples of Shunjian Gate. At this moment, Su Yi had arrived at a square in Shunjian Gate. Since he had already decided to stay in the Divine Sword sect for a few days and pretend to be Elder Su's disciple, he didn't know if Elder Su would punish him when the time came. He might as well take a stroll around the Divine Sword sect. Su Yi wanted to see if there were any benefits that he could get. At the very least, he would be able to earn back a little. And the benefits of Shunjian Gate, Su Yi first thought, was whether he could get some martial arts techniques or sword skills. The dignified Divine Sword sect was a first-rate power in the Middle State. Their martial techniques and sword arts would definitely be extraordinary. However, Zhang Qing's words dashed Su Yi's hopes. The 72 peaks of Xinjiang Gate were Tianjian Peak, Sword Hidden Peak, Lingjian Peak, 15 Xinjian Peak, 18 Dao Sword Peak, and 36 other sword peaks. But the martial arts techniques, sword skills, and many swords of Shunjian Gate were said to be on Sword Hidden Peak, and only qualified disciples could set foot there. And if he wanted to obtain the martial skills and sword arts on the Hidden Sword Peak, he would need to use points to exchange for them. Every grade of martial skill and sword technique, as well as various levels of cultivation resources, required points to be exchanged. The higher the level of the martial skill, sword skill, and cultivation resources, the more points it would require. Su Yi could not be considered a disciple of Xinjiang Gate. Naturally, he would not have Xinjiang Gate points. When Su Yi asked Zhang Qing if she had any points, Zhang Qing expressed her helplessness. Outer sect disciples were given a fixed amount of points every month, but they were pitifully low. 1 year's worth of points could only be exchanged for a set of good grade martial arts skills. Su Yi's hopes were dashed. In the end, he found out from Zhang Qing that although he could not go to Sword Hidden Peak as an outer sect disciple of Shunjian Gate, even though he could not enjoy as many benefits as an inner sect disciple, at least he would have someone to guide him in the sect. In the middle of every month in Shunjian Gate, the older direct disciples of the sect would give lectures in the Sword Hall. They would impart all kinds of knowledge and solve the doubts of the disciples. Regardless of whether it was an inner sect disciple or an outer sect disciple, they could go to the Sword Hall to listen to the lectures. Today happened to be the middle of the month. Su, he had an idea. He could come and listen to the lectures. At the same time, he could also understand Xinjiang Gate. The two of them landed on the flying savage beast. Zhang Qing looked around with some anticipation in her eyes. She said to Su Yi, "It's right ahead. If we're lucky, there'll be a protector teaching us. That'll be a huge gain." Su Yi smiled. He had the mentality of gaining knowledge and was not looking forward to it. The so-called sword hall was actually a square surrounded by courtyards on all sides. It was not small and could accommodate nearly 1,000 people. There were many ancient sword patterns carved around the sword hall. There were neatly arranged futons in the square. At this moment, the square was completely full. It was densely packed with people. There was no space at all. Many people could only stand in the corner and listen. On a stone platform at the top, there were a few young men and women standing respectfully. Among these young men and women, the younger ones were 27 or 28 years old. The older ones were more than 30 years old. They all had an extraordinary temperament. Their eyes were bright and their expressions were solemn. They stood together behind an old man who looked about 60 years old. This old man was sitting cross-legged. He was thin and had the demeanor of an immortal. His white beard was fluttering in the wind. His eyes were kind and serious. He was teaching without stopping. The thousands of disciples below were so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. They were listening carefully. There were many disciples sitting in front. Judging from their clothes, they were obviously intersect disciples. Su Yi and Zhang Qing walked into the sword hall. No one raised their eyes. Only the few senior disciples at the top glanced at them from afar. Then, their eyes returned to normal. "Oh my God, it's an elder. There is an elder teaching today." When he saw the sage-like old man, Zhang Qing was so excited that his entire body trembled. He lowered his voice and spoke in a trembling voice. He was very excited. To be able to receive a lesson from an elder was something that only happened once in a year. Su Yi was also very surprised that an elder of Xinjiang Gate could teach an outer sect disciple. He was surprised and immediately became interested. Looking at the immortal elder from afar, Su Yi secretly sized him up. He could not feel any aura fluctuation. However, when Su Yi looked at that figure a few more times, his heart trembled for no reason. Behind the elder stood a few senior disciples, whose auras were imperceptibly vigorous and fierce. Yuanjin stage and above. Although those senior disciples did not deliberately release their aura, the invisible aura fluctuation from their bodies made Su Yi secretly estimate that their cultivation had most likely surpassed the Yuan spirit stage. Su Yi and Zhang Qing could not find any empty seats. They could only quietly sit in a corner. The voice of the immortal elder was loud and clear. It was loud enough to clearly fall into the ears of all the disciples present. Today, I will talk about the origin of martial arts. As a practitioner, you should not only cultivate martial arts and martial techniques, you should also have some understanding of their origins. It is said that in the ancient times, there were few humans and many beasts. The ancient humans had to defend against the attacks of savage beasts at all times. After a long time, their physical strength and intelligence continuously improved. That was the beginning of martial arts, the initial embryonic form of martial arts. Under such development, in the ancient times, there was an ancient ancestor who entered the Tao through martial arts. He worshipped the Tao of Shangwu and was brave and fierce in battle. He could shatter mountains with his fists, split the heavens with his palms, step on the stars, and shatter the void. Hearing this, all the disciples present were filled with yearning. Their eyes lit up and their hearts surged. Step on the stars and shatter the void. What kind of expert was that? The martial arts have a long history, competing with each other. From the ancient times until now, our human ancestors have been tempered for a long time. They repeatedly pondered over and over again, causing the martial arts to continuously evolve, develop, and innovate. Today, there are 6 continents, 3 continents, and 1 ocean. It can be said that there are many sects and experts as common as clouds. Chapter 359. All of you are disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. Today, I will talk about the sword with you all. Although the Xinjiang Gate doesn't only have sword techniques, it is also famous for its sword techniques. Back then, the founder of the Xinjiang Gate single-handedly swept through the 6 continents, 3 continents, and 1 ocean, suppressing the many paragons of heaven of that era. His power spread far and wide, and his name shook the entire universe. In the end, he founded the Xinjiang Gate, which has stood tall to this day, and has an illustrious reputation. Speaking of the founder of the Xinjiang Gate, the eyes of the sage-like elder rippled with a sense of pride, and his eyes couldn't help but brighten. The disciples of the Xinjiang Gate all felt their blood boiling at this moment. They were extremely proud to be disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. After pausing for a moment, the sage-like elder seemed to be very satisfied with the reactions of the disciples. He continued, "The sword is the king of all weapons. The swordsman is graceful, free and easy, flexible, elegant, and can also be unruly, wild, and unconventional. Sword techniques require the mind to follow the body, the internal and external harmonization, the cultivation of the body and mind, the unity of the body and spirit, the uniform speed of the movements like flowing clouds and flowing water, continuous and unending. There is stillness in motion and stillness in motion. The combination of illusion and reality, and the combination of hardness and softness." The elder spoke tirelessly, and the disciples listened attentively, as if they were intoxicated, for fear of missing out on anything. Su Yi originally didn't have high expectations, as what the elder was talking about was just some basic knowledge. But it just so happened that Su Yi gradually began to listen attentively. Ever since he started cultivating, Su Yi had been cultivating by himself. Although he had consulted the remaining 3 elders of the Tian Yao school, Su Yi had only received some insights on the cultivation of the origin spirit realm and had never received such basic guidance. To Su Yi, such basic knowledge was what he lacked the most. Although he was already at the 3rd level of the origin spirit realm, Su Yi's true combat strength had long since surpassed the average 3rd level of the origin spirit realm by relying on his extraordinary trump cards. But at this moment, Su Yi was listening to the basic cultivation knowledge, comprehending it, and integrating it. He couldn't help but feel a sense of enlightenment in many areas. It was like a river flowing towards the sea. The water gurgled, and no one would notice the silt at the bottom of the river. Su Yi's understanding at this moment was as if the silt of the river bottom was completely washed clean, and the river water, with an unstoppable force, surging towards the sea. The sword should be held loosely, nimbly, and flexibly. The wrist should be firm, and the softness should be used for strength. Strength and softness should complement each other, and use softness to overcome strength. The footwork should be swift, and the body should assist the sword. Today's lesson will end here. After nearly 4 hours, the sage-like elder slowly swept his gaze across the group of disciples in front of him. His voice was a little louder as he slowly said, "As a cultivator, apart from cultivation, you should also cultivate your body and mind and respect your teachers. As a martial arts disciple, you must regard virtuous people as your teachers, be humble and eager to learn, respect your teachers, and uphold the virtues of martial arts. Before you learn martial arts, you must know etiquette. Before you learn martial arts, you must know the right way, and support the weak and suppress the evil. Only in this way can you truly reach a higher level and understand the true essence of martial arts." The loud voice reverberated throughout the training hall. When it landed in the ears of the disciples, it was like a clap of thunder, causing them to tremble. This disciple understands. Thank you, elder, for your teachings. All the disciples bowed their heads in respect. Su Yi's heart was also shaken. Such a lesson was completely beyond Su Yi's expectations. It was completely different from what he had imagined. Before you learn martial arts, you must know etiquette. Before you learn martial arts, you must know the right way, and support the weak and suppress the evil. Su Yi muttered to himself. Looking at the sage-like elder, his impression of the Xinjiang Gate also improved a lot. As the mighty sage said, People are never tired of teaching. They are never tired of learning. They are keen and eager to learn. They are not ashamed to ask questions. Today, I'll give you some time. Is there anything you want to ask? The elder smiled slightly and looked at the disciples in front of him. All the disciples bowed their heads. Some of them looked at each other. In front of the elder, they did not dare to look up. Being suppressed for no reason, few people dared to speak casually. Elder, I want to know the most basic knowledge of swordsmanship. A voice rang out in the crowd. Such a voice immediately made all the disciples secretly puzzled. The most basic knowledge of swordsmanship. How could he ask such questions to a dignified elder? Wouldn't that make me seem mediocre? What's more, on such an occasion, it's not easy to meet an elder to give a lesson. How could he pluck up the courage to ask such mediocre questions? Numerous gazes followed the voice and looked curiously in the direction it had originated from. Finally, all eyes turned to the back corner of the training hall. A young man in the outer disciples' uniform stood up. He carried a broken sword on his back. It was rusty and very eye-catching. The young man was not old. He was 15 or 16 years old. He was thin, and his black hair draped over his shoulders. He stood there quietly, but he gave people a feeling of immovable. Behind the elder, the few senior disciples also looked at Su-yi, and their hearts began to beat faster. The sage-like elder sat cross-legged without moving. He looked at Su-yi for a while. For some reason, there was a flash of light in his eyes. The swordsmanship can be broken down into stabbing, hacking, lifting, hanging, chopping, pointing, bursting, slashing, stirring, washing, and so on. Stabbing has to be swift, pointing has to be straightforward, carrying has to be sharp, wiping has to be flexible, whipping has to be steady, hanging has to be close, striking has to be majestic, lifting has to be pulled, and cutting has to be at the wrist. These are the basic knowledge of swordsmanship. There are detailed records in the foundation of swordsmanship in the sect. Although these are the basics, they are the foundation. You have to study them well. If you don't have them, you can go to the hidden sword peak to exchange for the foundation of swordsmanship. The elder replied to the young man. The young man was naturally Su-yi. He remembered that he was going to cultivate the 13 Gale swords, which was a royal grade sword technique, and he lacked the basic knowledge of swordsmanship. Now that he had encountered such an opportunity, Su-yi naturally did not want to miss it. Elder, I just joined the Xinjiang Gate and don't have any points yet. Elder, can you give me the foundation of swordsmanship? Then, just as everyone was about to turn their attention away, Su-yi once again said this to the elder. Su-yi pondered. The foundation of swordsmanship is probably not a treasure to the elder of the Xinjiang Gate. Swish, swish, all of a sudden, all eyes were on Su-yi. Everyone was stunned. If you don't have any points, you can ask the elder for the foundation of swordsmanship. This made everyone dumbfounded. This guy really dares to ask for it. Next to Su-yi, Zhang Qing was already dumbfounded. An outsider who pretended to be an outer sect disciple of the Xinjiang Gate was currently listening to a lesson in the training hall. Zhang Qing was already scared out of her wits, let alone in front of the elder. Chapter 360. When Zhang Qing heard that Su-yi was not only unaware of the situation, he even wanted to ask for the foundation of the sword from the elder. His face instantly turned pale. The sage-like elder was also stunned. He never would have thought that an outer sect disciple would ask for the foundation of the sword from him and say that he didn't have any points for it. If he didn't give it to him, it wouldn't be good. As an elder, he would be called stingy. Which one of you has the foundation of the sword? Give it to this disciple. He's smart and eager to learn. He deserves to be encouraged. The elder said to the older disciples behind him. He really didn't have the foundation of the sword on him. Among the older disciples, a young man in his 30s looked at Su-yi. His eyes lit up and a ray of light appeared in his hand. He threw it towards Su-yi. The ray of light flashed and arrived in front of Su-yi. It was as if someone was lifting him up. Thank you, elder. Su-yi stretched out his hand and caught the object in his hand. Su-yi's eyes flickered when he felt the force enter his palm. However, he didn't show it on his face. Yuan Qi surged in his palm and dissolved the force. This time, it was a young man's turn to be surprised. This outer sect disciple was quite bold. He wanted to use this opportunity to embarrass this outer sect disciple a little, so that this outer sect disciple would have respect for the elders and not speak carelessly. Therefore, the foundation of the sword that the young man gave Su-yi contained some hidden force. He thought that it would be enough to embarrass an outer sect disciple. However, the outer sect disciple didn't seem to care at all. This made the young man surprised. How could a young man's hidden force escape the eyes of the sage-like elder who was sitting cross-legged? He looked at the calm Su-yi, and a ray of light flashed in his eyes again. The other disciples didn't know about this. Su-yi scrutinized the item in his hand. It was a scroll made of a special material. It should be made from the skin of a certain type of savage beast. What was written on it should be the basics of the sword. Putting it away, Su-yi cupped his fists and looked at the white-bearded elder. He continued to ask, "Elder, can this disciple still ask some questions? You still have to ask?" Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Was this outer sect disciple really not done yet? His guts are really not small. Sure. On the other hand, the elder's expression didn't change as usual, and his eyes regained their calmness. Sabers, spears, swords, halberds, axes, battle axes, hooks, tridents, staves, and lances. I wonder which weapon Elder thinks is stronger. Su-yi asked, "What is this guy trying to do?" However, when this question was asked, the entire audience couldn't help but become restless. This was the Shunjian Gate, where the sword was respected. This outer sect disciple actually asked this question in front of the elder. The elder was also surprised, but his expression didn't show it. He just looked at Su-yi with a brighter gaze and replied, "There is no strong or weak weapon. It depends on the person, not the weapon. However, the spirit of the sword is respected by people and gods. It is supreme and noble. With profound Taoist skills, one can enter the legendary Xian realm." Was a profound sword art? Su-yi continued to ask. It is said that the person and the sword become one. The sword and the spirit become one. The elder replied, "Elder, may I ask which is more important, the sword art or the cultivation method?" Su-yi asked, "If you practice the sword but don't practice the cultivation method, you will end up with nothing. However, there are exceptions. Some people have entered the Tao with their bodies, and some have entered the Tao with their swords." The elder continued to reply, "O genuine edition, asterisk first edition, if there is no master, can one become a hero?" Su-yi asked, 10 years of hard work is not as good as a master's." The elder said. He paused for a moment and then continued. "It is also said that a master can show the way, but a disciple can cultivate himself. It is like practicing the sword. The sword art is easy to teach, but the sword momentum and spirit are difficult to teach." The training hall, which had been in an uproar, gradually quieted down after Su-yi's question and the elder's answer. Even the older disciples were listening attentively at this moment. They had never thought about such a question. Perhaps they had thought about it, but they had never dared to ask. Now the outer sect disciple had asked, and they also wanted to know the answer. Su-yi's eyes moved. He looked at the elder and continued to ask, "Then, is talent more important or personal training more important?" Su-yi attached great importance to this question. In the barbarian city, Wang Chuanda of the Holy Mountain said that he was only qualified to be a handyman. It was only wishful thinking for him to become a strong man. Although Su-yi had never believed all this, he wanted to know the thoughts of other strong men at this moment. Talent is naturally the most important. The elder spoke in a loud voice that resounded through the entire hall. All the disciples nodded. Talent had already determined everything. Those extremely talented people in the mountain sect were so terrifying that they had long surpassed them. Could it be that everyone thinks so? The light in Su-yi's eyes dimmed a little, but he was not disappointed because everyone thought so. But everything is special. As I said just now, some people have entered the Tao with their physical bodies, and some have entered the Tao with their swords. At this moment, the sage-like elder stroked his white beard and looked at Su-yi. He continued, "As long as you experience enough training, You will be able to unleash your endless potential. There are thousands of forms in the mortal world, and if you choose one of the 3,000 Tao of heaven and earth, you will be able to achieve something. However, it is said that those who can succeed are like carps passing through the dragon gate. There are very few people who can succeed. Su-yi pondered and seemed to have understood something. There was a light in his eyes. Well, that's all for today. You can all leave. Su-yi wanted to ask something, but the elder spoke first. He looked at Su-yi and asked, "What's your name?" "Elder, I'm Su-yi." Su-yi nodded and bowed with cupped fists. Su-yi, the elder muttered in a low voice and smiled. He then looked away from Su-yi, got up, and left with the few disciples. "Farewell, elder." The disciples bowed and sent them off respectfully. At this moment, Zhang Qing was sweating profusely. Large droplets of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was so scared that his heart was about to jump out. Seeing the elder leave, Zhang Qing heaved a sigh of relief, as if he had just been pardoned. "Who is this elder?" Su-yi asked Zhang Qing. He had a good impression of this sage-like elder. "This is Elder Ing Dang from the 35th Sword Peak." Zhang Qing's eyes were full of awe. He said to Su-yi, "Elder Ing Dang is not simple. Several disciples who left their names on the Sword Pagoda are from the 35th Sword Peak, and some of them are ranked in the top 10. Elder Ing Dang." At this moment, Su-yi could not help but be stunned. That sage-like elder, who was like an otherworldly expert, was actually called Elder Ing Dang. Wasn't this contrast too great? Su-yi, I think I've heard of this name before. I think I've heard of it too. Chapter 361. There was no doubt that Su-yi's performance had aroused everyone's interest. Hearing Su-yi's name, some disciples lowered their heads and pondered. They seemed to have heard of this name before, but they couldn't remember it at the moment. "Let's go, it's time to go back." Zhang Qing whispered to Su-yi. He was already scared out of his wits in the training hall, and now he heard the disciples whispering about Su-yi's name. He was even more afraid of stirring up trouble. "Okay, let's go." Su-yi nodded. He felt that today was enough. He had benefited a lot from Elder Ying's lecture and wanted to go back to the 36th Sword Peak to comprehend it. Several youths walked in a group, forcing their way between Su-yi and Sun Qing. They even snorted coldly, causing Sun Qing to almost spin in a circle. He staggered and stabilized his body. "Don't you see that there's someone here?" Zhang Qing said, somewhat annoyed. "Oh, isn't this Zhang Qing from the 36th Sword Peak? What, do you have a problem with me?" Hearing Zhang Qing's words, the youth suddenly stopped and turned to stare at Zhang Qing. Their expressions were obviously extremely disdainful, and they sneered. Su-yi's eyes moved, but his expression didn't show it. These people seemed to be doing it deliberately. "No problem, it's okay, you can go." Zhang Qing looked at the youths, his face darkened, and he immediately squeezed out a smile. "You obviously have a problem with me, and now you say you don't. You're obviously playing with me." The leader of the group was a youth about the same age as Zhang Qing. He had an overbearing aura, and he stared coldly at Zhang Qing, as if he wouldn't give up. Zhang Qing's face darkened. He didn't want to cause trouble, but he didn't expect these guys to deliberately make things difficult for him. He lowered his head and said, it's okay." Su-yi interrupted Sun Qing's words. Just now it was clearly these fellows who bullied others first. He couldn't bear to see them bully others like this. He looked at the several youths and said, "That's enough. Don't go too far." "Oh, are you trying to stand up for Zhang Qing? How dare you act so rashly in front of the elders? Do you think you can win the elders' favor because of your outstanding performance?" The leader stared at Su-yi with a faint sneer in his eyes. Su-yi cast a sidelong glance at the young man. He finally understood that these people were not targeting Zhang Qing on purpose. Their real target was him. "If there's nothing else, then leave. Don't provoke me. This is a warning." Su-yi's expression darkened as he warned the young man. The outer sect disciples didn't want to cause any more trouble. Hearing Su-yi's words, the youths were stunned for a moment. Then, they revealed even more undisguised disdain and sneers. The leader of the youths sneered and said loudly, looking straight at Su-yi, he said, "Are you new to Xinjiang Gate? I don't care how you came here. Just now, the elders said that as a martial artist, you must be humble, eager to learn, and respect your elders. We are your senior brothers, but you are so arrogant and conceited. It seems that we need to teach you a good lesson. As his voice fell, the aura of the leader surged and locked onto Su-yi. The leader of the youths had been unhappy with Su-yi for a long time. When he saw that eldering seemed to pay special attention to this kid, and even took the initiative to ask for his name, he couldn't help but feel jealous. If it weren't for this youth, he would have already asked the elders a question. In this way, he could perform better in front of the elders. Maybe Eldering would be happy and directly take him to the 35th Sword Peak to become an inner sect disciple. Thinking of this, the leader of the youth's eyes became colder. It was this kid who ruined his good thing. And this kid was still at the level of learning the foundation of sword. The leader of the youths guessed that this kid called Su-yi's strength was only SOSO. He should be a rookie who had just entered Xinjiang Gate. It was a good opportunity to teach him a lesson and vent the anger in his heart. Following this argument, the disciples of Xinjiang Gate who were already leaving suddenly stopped. They looked over and began to watch. Dog biting dog, a mouthful of fur. There's a good show to watch. A group of youths who were inner sect disciples gathered together and laughed loudly without restraint. The leader of the group of inner sect disciples naturally heard the laughter of the group of inner sect disciples. His face was a little unhappy and secretly twitched. He immediately blamed this anger on Su-yi. Humph! With a cold snort, the leader's face was gloomy and ugly. He immediately raised his hand and was about to slap Su-yi's face. Pa! The crisp sound of a slap echoed in the training hall. The crowd did not even see it clearly, but they had already heard the sound of slap. Instantly, everyone's gazes landed on Su-yi's face. The strange thing was that the man's angular face was unscathed, and his expression was the same as usual. Puff! Immediately after, it was the leader of the group of inner sect disciples who spat out a mouthful of blood. Together with a few teeth that fell out, a blood mist poured out, and his face instantly turned pale. On the left cheek of the leader of the outer sect disciples, a clear palm print was red and swollen to purple. Blood seeped out. The leader of the group of inner sect disciples was in a daze. The shock in his eyes was gradually becoming more and more intense. The arm that he had just stretched out was still in the same position, and his entire person was stunned. Bullying others with your power. I already warned you. I gave you a chance, but you didn't want it. Then you have to bear the consequences. The cold words came out of Su-yi's mouth. Under everyone's gaze, he raised his hand and shook it. The 5 fingers of the hand that had just stretched out were slightly bent and directly clasped onto the youth's shoulder. Chila! Before the crowd could see it clearly, the leader of the group of inner sect disciples was directly sent flying and then heavily smashed into a corner of the training hall. The impact caused the walls of the training hall to tremble, and he spat out blood. The few youths who were originally as arrogant as the leader were now all dumbstruck and trembling all over. Such a scene made it difficult for everyone to recover from their shock. Suddenly, a strange silence filled the air. At this moment, the expressions of the group of inner sect disciples also changed in astonishment. Only Zhang Qing was not shocked at all. Just now, he did not want Su-yi to cause any more trouble. He already knew that the leader of the group was not a match for him at all. At this moment, Zhang Qing could only sigh helplessly for the youth. Some people were looking for trouble, and there was really no way to stop them. Su-yi ignored the remaining outer sect disciples who were dumbstruck and had fear in their eyes. His gaze swept across and landed on the group of inner sect disciples. He asked, "Who said that a dog bites a dog and get a mouthful of fur? Get out here now." The group of inner sect disciples, whose expressions had changed from shock, were once again stunned when they heard Su-yi's words. They looked at Su-yi in astonishment. Original first F *****. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.